I really messed this up.
Yeah, everything got kind of messed up in there. I was
Yeah.
built for hell, man. What do you expect? Of course, I'm going to have to make problems. Puerto
Yep.
Rapada is all about copying, right? It's about like that kind of, anyways. So, anyways, now I've got a copy. I've got to do it twice.
Right.
So it says it's recording. There we
Yeah.
go. Recording. Okay, good. So, so yeah, I'll have to do Puerto Bhadrapada a second time. These last ones are really tripping me up. Um, it's been a really interesting now that we're kind of coming to the end of it, right? It's that end of times kind of energy now.
Yes.
We've all sort of accepted our fate. We've rounded the bend, and now we're just like, okay, just take me. I'm done. Um,
It's like that Pisces energy now. It's just like, oh, we've been through hell now. Like we just want to sit back and chill. Like everything's too much. Yeah, so
yeah,
true.
exactly. And it's kind of, God, I can feel the energy of these things so much every time I go to one. Because I'm kind of feeling that way with the Nakshatra project now too. It's like I'm kind of done with it. I'm already moving on to the next thing. And well, Dana knows me very well this way. I've got a very strong Mars, right? I do great courses. I get off in the sun. I'm running in the beginning. I'm doing all this work. It's beautiful. Everybody's happy to me. And it comes to the end, and Dana's like, "Where's that last paper from 3 months ago?" And I'm like, it's coming. Um, and so that's my Mars energy kind of petering out right now. I'm very sorry, guys. This is just how it goes. Um, I really do my best. I really, really work hard for you guys, but that finishing energy is tough for me. I used to do the construction work, right? I was kind of like the journeyman, which is like the big rooster on the site. And so I would run around and I'd be doing all the work and I'd do all the bulk of the work. My helpers would come up and they'd go like, "What do you need me for?" I'd be like, "Your job is just to watch me and clean up after me." And so I'd run around doing all this work, just dropping my tools when I was done. And I didn't worry about anything. I just did it and went, did it and went. Same at the end of the job. The end of the job came, and that was my time. I was on holidays then. All the laborers, everybody else was working. I just sat back, oh, nice, relaxed, watched, supervised, made jokes. It was like the good old days at the end of jobs. And so I really still feel that energy when I'm doing this kind of work. When I get to the end, it's like, I really need, to be honest with you, I really need a student to pick up after me, right? Just to clean up all my mess that I'm leaving. Because I do very beautiful work, but at the end, it's just kind of like, it needs some touches. And so anyway, so I'm struggling through that now. Uttara Bhadrapada. So let me share the screen here. This is, there we go. There we go. So Uttara Bhadrapada, well, it's really easy to see how Uttara Bhadra and Purva Bhadra work together here. They're both very much focused on that fantasy kind of life. Now, the big difference here is that Purva Bhadrapada is like the devil asking you, "What do you want? You can have anything." And then in Purva Bhadrapada, it's more like your dreams asking you, "You can have anything. You can make anything a reality." And so even well, Dana had mentioned the sort of mystical creatures that come out of all of this. And I think just in those first pada, Purva Bhadrapada, you get a lot of these sort of like strange, mixed, blended creatures, but they have some foundation in reality. Now, there's also a lot of, in Purva Bhadrapada, there's a lot of copying going on as well, imitation kind of stuff going on as well. So you'll find a lot of those animals that imitate other animals with their calls and all that kind of thing. But as all that energy moves from Purva to Uttara, it severs that connection with reality. Now they're not, now the fantasy isn't like a copy of reality somehow. Now the fantasy is really fantasy. It's really, really out there, really kind of getting wild. Now, I say that, but there's still a lot of like actual sort of sea creatures that we'll find in Uttara Bhadrapada as well. The serpent of the deep, right? That's obviously pointing to like the Leviathan in the Bible, that great sea monster. It's pointing to like the squid, that giant squid down in the bottom. And these are things that it exists, but it exists in reality a little bit, but it exists in our imagination a lot. You know, this kind of thing. It's got almost more power in the imagination than it does in reality here. And we'll find that with some of the other positions, like Rahu here, or sorry, Mars here, really uses people's imaginations against them. It's very, very deadly position. But anyways, we'll get to that. Let's start at the beginning. Here we are. 26 Nakshatra, Uttara Bhadrapada, middle part of Pisces, basically the bulk of Pisces. It's associated with the Pegasus, of course, another one of those fantastic creatures. I mentioned this is the deep ocean, but this is also deep space, right? This is deep ocean, deep space, and then that ocean that all our souls are going towards, right? The body, mind, spirit, you could say, of Uttara Bhadrapada. So this is the later one with lucky feet, the Uttara Bhadrapada, the left foot, the ray of light, the serpent of the deep. We said this is kind of all the way through this now for the last few nakshatras. We've been really meeting all of Shiva's demons, it's been this whole host of demonic kind of creatures here. And that's really because we're on that Saturnian side of this, where we're really dealing with the muck of life. Now, I mentioned that sort of stream of the Milky Way, that sort of cloudiness that's in the sky. These creatures like Loch Ness, that's all kind of obvious. This is an interesting one. This sort of lists it as being the crown chakra, or the third eye, happening here. Now, this really is, it's interesting because it's kind of the crown, it's kind of the bottom. It's the bottom. It's like everything's sort of almost coming together in this position. Now, they sort of call this the crown, because the crown is where we really kind of let go of all the reality in the crown. We sort of, we go through all the chakras and we're still sort of connected to reality somehow. We're still kind of in duality, right? It's all the lower tattvas, in a sense. The crown chakra is sometimes not really considered a crown chakra at all. It's not considered a chakra at all. It's sort of beyond all the chakras. So if we think of the tattvas, now we're beyond reality. We're beyond the existence. And so this is really, I think, if we think of Uttara Bhadrapada, it would be the crown, or Brahmarandra, which is a little bit different than the crown. And then when we get to Pushan, I think we're getting up into that 12 finger space. That is, we've gone beyond in Pushan. It's all sort of dissolved. Now this is probably the main nakshatra of dissolution, in a sense. It's like you've got the body of Kalpurush there. It's just went through Purva Bhadrapada. In a sense, Purva Bhadrapada, it's really dark. It's like the mobster getting rid of the body. Purva Bhadrapada, he chops all the body up, right? Uttara Bhadrapada, then he throws the body into the wood chipper. God, I'm dark, isn't it? And then in Pushan, it's like it's coming out the other side of the wood chipper. There's nothing left. It's just indistinguishable from the wood chips. Oh God, why am I so dark today? Must be this Netflix garbage I've been watching. Addictions. So and it's all it's all so fantasy stuff I watch too, not connected with reality at all. Really wild stuff out there. So anyways, so the rulership, here we go. The rulership is, I mentioned the mango tree, neem, Indian lilac. The mango tree is really sort of important fruit. The mango, it's like, by Ayurveda, it's one of the healthiest fruits. It's almost like, if we look at the fruits, it's almost like the ghee of fruit. Balances all the doshas. It's like just like a medicine for just about everything. You can almost say the same with what mango and coconut are really like, this very, very pure sort of fruits. Anyways, so mango is like that. And neem as well. One of the actions of neem is really good for people who have a lot of pitta. Too much fire in the stomach. And what the neem will do is it acts as a purgative. It helps to, when you're, I know I get this sometimes, you get really good neem in India. It's almost explosive. again, we're going to get really dark and ugly for a moment here, but it's like I get these stomach problems and I get these headaches and fevers once in a while, probably from bad diet, too much coffee and cigarettes, all of that. But anyway, so I get this, every couple of months. It's just too much for me. In India, I get this really good neem. I just take like a little bit of the neem, and wow, it's explosive. It just cleans out my whole body, just flushes out all the heat, all the acid. Now, this is kind of Uttara Bhadrapada. It's flushing everything out. It's really cleaning everything out at the end. And so like that. So Brahmins, those engaged in sacrifices, charity, penance, very wealthy people, recluses, heretics, monarchs, and valuable corn. So this is a very charitable position. It's a combination of Jupiter and Saturn. These are two of the big heavyweights of the whole nakshatra scheme. And so you get these people, they're usually quite charitable. They're oftentimes working in some kind of, they're very idealistic sort of people, right? They're not really connected to reality that much. So depending on what planets are here and that sort of stuff, they're often working for these almost big, unrealistic ideals. Somehow they're dreamers, right? They're living kind of a fantasy life. Now, it is ruled by Vishnu, and so it is a maintaining, a sustaining principle. A lot of that Vishnu principle is Vishnu is all about kind of the conservation of energy. And so really what Vishnu is Vishnu is kind of the cycles of energy, because that's where the energy is always conserved. Shiva, I've been thinking about this recently. Shiva brings destruction. Shiva is almost more of that direct time. So when we're working with Uttara Bhadrapada, we're much in it's a circular energy. It's a kshatriya, it's a warrior. That makes it very powerful when some of the other kshatriya planets are here. Very, very strong. Not in a nice way. It's like that. I don't know if there's like a little bit of a little man syndrome or something going on in here. But it's like, especially with those masculine and those kshatriya type planets, they really tend to assert their dominance, you could say. Anyways, it's a very human nakshatra, right? Humans, again, we talked about that, just only human, right? And so they try, but they make a lot of mistakes. It's seeking some kind of balance. I think it's that wateriness of the nakshatra, seeking balance, very fixed. It's very heavy, like the ocean, right? You're not going to change the ocean. You're not going to change space. I get a sense in Pisces, and especially the Uttara Bhadrapada, we don't have much space for the fifth element when we look at the signs and everything. But really, we're getting into the ether element, right? We're really getting into that side of Jupiter when we come here, that dissolution. It's just sort of space. And space is fixed, right? You don't change that. So, it's motivated by pleasures and enjoyments. We'll see here, especially with the sun, right? Sun is the way we express ourselves. And so the sun here, it's not very good at expressing itself. It's not a great placement for sun, Pisces, right? But one way they can express themselves is through fantasy and things like this, right? These are the people that sort of dress up as the princesses or this kind of thing, flowing and very foggy as well when the sun, like you can't really, well, this is part of the dress up, and it's not quite Purva Bhadrapada where they're copying something else, but they're kind of living a bit of a fantasy world. They're expressing themselves through their imagination. And so this comes into dress up. This comes into, you see the pictures of Uttara Bhadrapada, sun there, very foggy, cloudy. You can hardly see them in the pictures. It's like a bit of overexposed. The light's kind of funny. All of those things come into there with the sun. But then aside from just that sort of light that's coming off them is this just, you can't see who they really are, right? They're quite disconnected from who they really are. They're kind of living in this sort of fantasy, dreamy kind of world. Now, something like the moon here, like the sun there, that's really really personal. That's how they're expressing themselves. When the moon is here, it becomes more their whole sort of setting and culture that they live in is very dreamy and fantastic that way. And so it becomes quite kind of good for well, we'll get down there, but anyways, moon here becomes quite good for things like acting and even a little bit politics and things like that for these sort of people who grew up in these families that are disconnected from reality, essentially. Can also be a lot of drugs and things and drugs involved in this, right? Everything going cloudy, everything going kind of blurry. It is Pitta. We talked about how the neem and things like that can clear the Pitta very well. Tamasak Nakshatra, so it's still quite dark and inert. It's dissolution, right? It's not really nothing's really being created or maintained anymore here. It's being maintained very loosely in the imagination. It's like even when somebody dies, right? They start off, they're alive, they're a big part of your life. After they die, they start to fade away. They start to go away, but they still live on inside of us, inside of our imaginations. And so we got that part of it coming on here too. There's our mango tree. We can see all these lovely vitamins living in here. Tree can grow up to 40 meters and live up to 300 years old, the mango tree. I stayed in an ashram. God, there was the most incredible. It's just surrounded by these massive mango trees. They're amazing. I was up on the third floor rooftop and you just reach out and like grab a mango. Well, not when I was there. It wasn't mango season, but it was mango season. You just reached out and grabbed them from the rooftop. It's incredible. And so that's the mango. Again, I've been some of this I wrote earlier and it's been fading from me, so I'm just kind of skipping through. We can see the month of Bhadrapada and all kinds of things going on there. This is when the sun and the moon are conjunct in Bhadrapada. This is when Shivaratri happens. All right, this is they call the dark night of Shiva. And so different sort of versions on that. Some say it's the night when Shiva sleeps, but it's the night before Shiva's wedding kind of idea is what's going on there. And so it's that dark night where Shiva does sleep. And so what we do is we stay up all night drinking a bunch of bang and partying. There's a big wind up in Varanasi to this bunch of music concerts going all night. Place goes completely wild. And the point is that Shiva's the great protector. He's really the great savior of the whole zodiac, and he's sleeping for a night. And so Shivaratri, we have to stay up and sort of take care of ourselves, take care of our own families in a sense. So very Shiva related nakshatra, serpent of Deep, those lords of the cosmic waters, very much connected to fertility and the Kundalini energies. Now we talked a little bit about one of the things that happened to me in Uttara Bhadrapada is, and really all my writing, you guys can see I write a gazillion pages and stuff like that, but still my writing can't keep up with my thinking. And so I've thought way more about Uttara Bhadrapada than I've written, which I think that's very Uttara Bhadrapada as well, right? It's still, I haven't brought it to reality. It's all just sitting in my head up here. So anyways, so that's this, and it's that ground of fertility. It's that, so we've come out of nothing, you can say, in a sense, and we didn't know anything and we we're completely lost down there in hell. And then we thought, okay, well, what do I want? And it was a little bit demonic, and so we tried something. We thought, okay, this is what I want. So we tried fulfilling our desire, and we got our first lesson of the whole zodiac, and we kind of realized, okay, well, fulfilling our desires it's not gonna satisfy me. And so now we've moved on to Uttara Bhadrapada, where it's still sort of this, what do you want? But it's bigger than the desires. It's like more in the imagination. And so we're dreaming. This is the dreaming stage. It's like, well, what do I want? Well, I want this. I told Dana before it started, I'm like, oh, I want to go on these 3 1,000-kilometer pilgrimages this year. That's my big dream, right? So here I'm in Uttara Bhadrapada, I'm dreaming. So now I got to start to make that reality, and life, I'm going to meet up with life very soon, and we'll sort it out. We'll figure something out. We'll negotiate. But now I'm dreaming, right? It's very fertile ground for anything. Any kind of seeds can be planted here. Beautiful space that way. It's also sort of like in the fertility cycle and the moon cycle, it's like, well, the period's just ending and the fertility starting to come into the body as well. I think this is sort of that stage, yeah, that early follicle stage with Purva Bhadrapada. Now this is sort of, I think, that stage where one of those million eggs is being sort of selected, right? It's real, still this grand world of possibility where anything can be. And so what's going to happen is slowly one of those eggs, and I don't know exactly how it works, if a few of them start to get fertilized, because like there's a million of them, so a bunch just sort of get lost along the way. And so we're kind of in that area where a bunch are about to get lost along the way. So Ananta Vishnu, Vishnu's sort of an interesting character. I was looking at him from a bit of a different perspective, and another, what the heck was I looking at? I think I went back to my intro for Vedic astrology book. Anyways, I was talking about Vishnu there, and it's interesting because Vishnu, then there's sort of these three. It's Vishnu and Lakshmi are hanging out there, and there's sort of these three different Lakshmis in a sense that work, and it's like the Sattvic, Rajasic, Tamasic Lakshmi. And so this year, I think we've come into the Tamasic Lakshmi. We've come into that Lakshmi that's very much, or the Vishnu that's very much like Shiva. Now, I'll go into this. I don't know if it relates here, but it was a nice sort of realization. So I went back to my earlier book on the intros to Vedic astrology, and I was looking over those Vishnu sections, and this is what Parashara, in the early parts of Parashara, they really highlight sort of the Vishnu mythology. And I was thinking about that. I was like, well, it suddenly occurred to me why astrologers follow Vishnu and not Shiva. And it was that sort of idea that Vishnu he's the one that orders the universe. And well, what are we doing if not studying the order of the universe? We're not really, through the astrology, we're studying that order. We're studying, I mentioned this before, we're studying the lower 25 tattvas, where they sort of say this about Vishnu too. So in Hinduism, it sort of depends what angle you're coming from, what god you worship. And then when you worship that god, you worship that god as everything. And so from the Vedic astrologer perspective, then Vishnu becomes everything. So he rules over the cycle of Shiva as well, right? Maintenance, creation, and destruction. And so this is that destructive nature of Vishnu here. Yeah. So anyways, and then anyways, like I said, Shiva is more, he's just racing towards the destructive. He's that pure destructive element. Now, if you worship Shiva, you can worship Shiva also as everything. But anyways, that's a whole, from this perspective, it's Vishnu anyways. And so Vishnu is doing all of this. This is sort of the cosmic rain. This has a lot to do with the cosmic rays, the cosmic rain. This has a lot actually to do with our hormonal cycles. That's our internal sort of cosmic rain. Our hormones really are. I think this probably has a lot to do with the lymphs as well, the lymph nodes. Now, I don't know if I mentioned this while we were going through Aquarius or not. There's a new thing, I don't know, it was all the rage in yoga circles for a little while, this concept of fascia, and how this sort of fascia energy, it's sort of, they say actually it's not our muscles that give shape to our bodies, it's the fascia. Even the fascia of the universe sort of idea gives shape to our houses, gives shape to the whole world. And that fascia it moves, it dances with our energy, you could say. And so it really shifts with our energy, and that's really where a lot of the energy sort of healing comes in. Now, another side of this is sort of the lymphs and the lymph vessels. There's this sort of idea that when the hormones go into the lymphs, there's this very automatic messaging that happens. And so the feet can tell something to the brain without it ever sort of really moving through the lymph. It sort of happens automatically. I had a friend years ago, we did a canoe trip, and he was one of these PhD physicists. Of course, nobody could understand what he was talking about, but it's very interesting. And he was talking about studying mercury in the water and how mercury how mercury reacted in water. And what they were looking at it was amazing what was happening, because the mercury didn't flow in the water. It's like he would find some mercury here and he would test, like the water's flowing this way, right? And so he would test here, and then he would test here, and he wouldn't find any mercury. And the mercury wasn't, it was like it would remain constant in this area of the water, even though the water was flowing. And then it would appear almost magically over here without ever actually seeming to have flowed from one place to the other. And so, well, that's maybe another reason why Mercury was such a studied substance in alchemy, because it's such a magical sort of substance that way. And even physicists now, like I asked him about it. I had dinner with him, I don't know, maybe 10 years after that canoe trip, and I asked him about it. And he was like, no, I still don't know what the hell's going on. And this is like, right, he's a big professor G in this stuff. So that's sort of that cosmic rain, I think, of Uttara Bhadrapada. It's very magical that way, in that sense. And so it's very much also, I think, tied up with our DNA and our ancient sort of ancestral heritage. You get a lot of that too, sort of in Pisces, is our it's our ancient ancestral heritage. It's our ancestral karma is a very nice way to say it, from here. And so it is connected to our DNA in a sense. This is also that energy. This is that blocking energy. This was sort of that Indra's big enemy, right? It blocked all the waters. Now, in a sense, this is a little bit like the plug you put in your bathtub that allows it to get deep. And so it's very much the stopping force. Jupiter is very much known as sort of this force of attachment. It's very sticky in a sense. It gets very attached. And that's just sort of like when you put the plug in the water gets built up. It's not flowing. It's not going anywhere. And so there is some sort of stuck energy here it's fixed, right? It's fixed energy, but there's some of that stuck energy, but it's like that stuckness is what allows us to grow deep in a sense. It allows us to kind of get into our own imagination, I guess, to a certain degree. And from that perspective of imagination, it's like it broadens the imagination, right? It's like you don't just imagine these sort of surfy stuff. You're not just copying, for example, right? Like, oh, I want to be like a king. And you see that a lot with the Purva Bhadrapada, right? Where they wear that, you see it in the old movies, especially, right? Where they wear the kind of the activist wearing the kind of military jacket sort of idea. And you see that a lot there. But now it's like they've grown deep. Their imagination is gone beyond all of that. So anyway, that's that plug, that depth. Now, I'm going to go backwards. It's really hard to talk about Uttara Bhadrapada without talking about Purva Bhadrapada. Now, I said something in the last class. Oh, I don't really get, what did I say? Vishaka. I don't really get Vishaka. I read something recently from the Greek perspective, and they said that Jupiter has 3 different kinds of lightning. Wow! As soon as he said that, I understood all 3 Jupiter nakshatras as 3 different kinds of lightning, 3 different kinds of grace. Essentially, is what Jupiter does. He offers us grace, and so there is those sort of 3 different kinds of grace that we get: low grace, middling grace, and the big grace, you could say. And so I think we've just sort of gotten that sort of bigger grace here. I'm not sure about that actually, because as far as the grace concerned and Jupiter's blessing, this almost seems like the very first blessing of Jupiter. Like where you're, well, the egg in the womb is just being selected. There's the first sort of grace, or that sperm has just sort of broken through the egg in a sense. And it's that first grace, that first Shaktipat, you could say. And that's really what Jupiter's offering. That's, I think, what each of the Jupiter nakshatras is offering is a kind of certain level of Shaktipat. So very, very beautiful that way. We could go into that more, but we'll try to stick with this nakshatra for now. So yeah, it also has a lot to do with it. So Murdachi's ghost, this is sort of a constellation up there. It's the chained woman. She's up there. This has a lot to do with the myth of Perseus, which also relates with the myth of Pegasus. So Perseus just killed Medusa, just chopped off Medusa's head, and her blood falls into the sea. It mixes up with some sea foam, and this great horse appears, the Pegasus. And so Perseus is interesting. I mentioned him not long ago in another nakshatra, but Perseus is interesting because he's a great hero, just as great of a hero as Hercules. And apparently, one of these new cartoon shows, maybe it was Emmett was telling me this, actually, was this great cartoon show, and Hercules is going, or Perseus is kind of complaining, why doesn't anybody know about me? And it was this idea of it's all, you need a good publicist. So Hercules had a good publicist sort of taking care of it and spreading his adventures, and he had a sort of that good partner getting it all out there. And Perseus was a hero equal to Hercules, but nobody ever heard of Perseus. And so that's a little bit like that. Like again, all of that sort of relates with the Uttara Bhadrapada. He's kind of in the distance a little bit more. He's faded. It could be that Perseus was the hero, the great hero in the days long before Hercules. And so Perseus and a lot of these gods, right? Like even Pan and a lot of these ancient figures that we sort of mix things to create something out of them, they've sort of, they're almost even older than like the Roman gods, for example, much older than those Roman gods. And so some of those gods like Perseus and heroes, they're faded back. They're so old. We've lost the stories of them. They're fading out of existence. What is it? It's not them that's fading out of existence. It's their personal identity that's fading out of existence. And it's interesting, while their personal identity might be fading out of existence, they've just sort of made those first steps to connecting with their soul again, right? They've gone through hell, and now we're working back the other way. There's hope. There's some optimism. Well, certainly going on through here. This is Saturn. I don't want to say how much of it's hope, but it's that Jupiter, that Pisces, sort of that unrealistic sort of hope is coming into them. Which is a really incredible first step to again making connecting to our soul. Now, God, I've been looking at this a lot lately. The difference between the polarity between sort of Sun and Aquarius, and the polarity between Aries and Libra. Because they're both very, very powerful sort of polarities. One is that truth and the lie, the original and the copy, and the other is the self and the other, I guess, sort of thing. And it's very interesting because, well, from the spiritual perspective, those are really two of the big benchmarks. Is, well, you got to figure out who you are. And so it's really that Aries sort of benchmark is figuring out how you really are. And somehow that's like, it's like that core of who you are as an individual in this world. And then I think by the time we get to the Sun, you could say then it's more of this sort of sense of you are Shiva, right? You're bigger than all of this. Anyways, and so then it sort of goes downhill from there. And we've kind of gotten to that down spout. Now, the other thing that I realized one of the reasons it was hard for me to write with Uttara Bhadrapada was because a lot of the realizations I was coming to at this point of this research project were bigger than Uttara Bhadra. It was really focusing on the whole thing. It was like everything was kind of coming together. And I really didn't know where to write it. And then I thought, wow, I got to write another book for that. Um, really is what it comes down to. I've started 3 books this week. Um, so oh, it's brilliant, man. I'm just like, wow, it's just been like, whoa, oh my God. So
I think it's so difficult to explain Uttara Bhadrapada because I also, when I read charts and someone has like placements here, and it's people that don't know astrology, right? And it's people that maybe don't even know stories or myths. So I always try to make it like a story, right? How I explained it or how I felt it is that it's very similar to what you are explaining to the tattvas, that you get into the higher tattvas, into that soul space. But how I explain it is that when we get to Uttara Bhadrapada, that identity of the individual dies. It's the place of the deep sea and the deep space where the identity itself dies. And what happens when we die as the identity is that we become what we could call an archetype. So like what you were saying about the heroes is like the identity of Perseus dies, but the archetype of the hero lives on. And then the archetype of the hero, because it is the ocean of unconscious, the whole unconscious imagination of the whole world. And then the next step would be Revati, which is that Pushan psychopompo, right? Psychopomp that takes the soul back into almost the rebirth in Ashwini, right? So this is for me, Uttara Bhadrapada is the collective unconscious.
yeah.
So it becomes like identities become archetypes. So
That's
how can you explain that?
100% perfect. Thank you for that, Dana. It's a really excellent way to say that. I've sort of given that, like, that's often the kind of advice I give to people who are dealing with death and things like this. And I'm sure I've discussed it here, the Indian death ritual, all being about sort of that dissolution of the individual, and forget about the particular papa and remember the archetype papa, the universal expression of papa. So yeah, the universal expression of the hero, universal expression of these things. And yeah, that's very, very well said. That sort of archetypical sort of existence is going on here. And that's really this area, and this is really like astrology is dealing with all of this sort of archetypical stuff. Now, this really, you find some people when you're giving astrology readings some people have a really hard time understanding symbolic logic or symbolic language. Sorry. And so it's very difficult sometimes, like you start talking about father figures and all they can think of is their individual father. They can't like even stretch that out to think, oh, the priest down in the corner, or any of this kind of stuff. And so that's sort of that stuckness, I think, being on the other side of the zodiac, I guess, where they're really they can't quite get that. But yeah, they're really very much dealing with those archetypical, those symbolic representations of things. Yeah, so it's very
And my ascending is Uttara Bhadrapada, and this, like what Dana's saying is spot on, where wherever I end up going, I become the archetype existence of what they need the hero to look like in the situations that I end up in. So I'm always like the poster for whatever company or whatever situation I find myself in, and I don't need to say anything. I just stand there and people are like, oh, you're the person, and I don't need to say anything. So part of my game is listen long enough till the hero knows how to act in a way, because up until I say something, I get projected on as the guy, but then I've got to really make sure to be listening, so I know how to be the Perseus at the end of the day, but then I just vanish after, and it's just kind of an essence of a role model that was kind of left there, rather than me actually having my own sense of identity. So like part of my whole life of where I'm at now is like, I can't hold on to any identity because it's going to be my environment, the unconscious collective that's going to define what I am in a way. And that's kind of my path as an ascending with this, I think. Yeah.
Well, I've given this warning to a lot of people regarding kind of ashram stuff and early days on their spiritual path in a sense, because sort of what happens, especially first couple times a person goes to an ashram and spends time in that, they come out of that and they've done all these really hard practices, and they're very pure, and they're very sort of living in this sort of kind of spiritual fantasy realm, and they come out of the ashram, and if they've done it right, they come out and they don't really have an identity anymore. They've kind of lost their, we lose our identity through all this spiritual stuff. Now, part of that cycle, again, I think a lot of it has to do with, it's all hero's journey. I'm Giesta, so it's all hero's journey. It's all coming back and going through all the motions of the cycle and coming back around. And we have to complete those circles, right? That's the healing, is completing the circles. And so anyway, so we have to do that. And so it's the same thing. We come out of the ashram and we've lost our identity. We have to find ourselves again. We have to become seated in ourselves again, because what happens if we don't is, as soon as we go out into the world wants to put an identity on us, right? Everyone you run into wants to put an identity on you. And if you don't have an identity, this is big problem with Ketu and Ascendant sort of people. They don't have an identity. And so other people impose their identity on them. And so they go with that for a while, but it never works out good for them, because people are going to give you the identity they want you to have, right? Not an identity that's good for you, not an identity that has anything to do with truth. And so we're all alone, really. One of the things that sort of happens in Uttara Bhadrapada, this is the Saturnius influence. Saturn almost brings a repetition to here. And so this is almost that area where it's like, okay, well, I don't know who I am. I don't have an identity. And so I try this, I try that, I try that. And so there's a lot of this sort of repetition. I saw, what was it? It was a Mars position here with some of the athletes and things like that. But it was like these basketball or these soccer athletes. And I really got this, like the sound of the ball bouncing, right? The sound of the metronome kind of thing. Dunk, 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 dunk. This quite fast repetition. And that's kind of, who else had this? Zakir Hussain. I don't know if you know him. He's a great tabla player. If you don't know him, you should listen to some of his tabla. It just blows you away. Even better yet, watch a YouTube video and try to watch that man's hands. They move at a fantastic rate. And that's sort of part of this as well. With the Mars, with the athletes and with the musicians, it's like they're moving. Their activity is fast. It's like I said with the hormones, it skips a beat. It just happens like instantly, automatically. And so, well, this is kind of like, this is really good if you're a top athlete or you're a top musician, or even if you're a top artist like Van Gogh, with the hands are moving and they're not really like they're moving on their own, right? It's that theory of art where you take the brain out of it, you draw the person, it kind of looks like a person, but it's all very free and flowing and like that. And if you look like Van Gogh's stuff is very much like that. Who else had that? Klimt, right? It was a very different Van Gogh, but it's still this sort of fantasy world that they're opening up. They're not dictating the movement of their hand, right? They're their actions. It's coming direct. And so this is very great if you're these sort of top sort of performing people. If you're not, this is hell, man. This is like, they can't sit still, right? They have no, this is Mars I'm talking about. Sorry, I'm skipping all ahead, um, but with Mars here, they have no impulse control. It's directly from the imagination to the action. Let's skip ahead and look at this. That's just me writing about everything I just said. So we see someone like Justin Trudeau. This is like what he said. He made those accusations against India and completely like screwed me over. I take that personally. I know it's Uttara Bhadrapada. Nothing is personal in Uttara Bhadrapada, but I took it personally anyways. But yeah, that's a good thing to remember. Nothing is personal at all in Uttara Bhadrapada. It's all universal. So anyways, you got Justin Trudeau there. He was a whitewater rafting guide, right? That's that probably quick reflex. He's like his papa, the Papa Trudeau. They're both yogis, actually. And so this is really good for flowing yoga. Who else has the Ramakrishna has this? Where is he? Paramahansa Yogananda has this. Sorry, not Ramakrishna. Yogananda has this Mars as well. And he was famous for like, he would just like bust into these crazy yoga moves. Kriya Yoga is his yoga, and it's this very spontaneous form of yoga. And that's what this Mars in Uttara Bhadrapada is giving, this very spontaneous movement. Of course, it's great if you're a master. If you're not a master, you're sitting there and you're tapping your feet, or you're rocking, or you're right, you've got some twitch, or you have no sort of, you have very little motor control. And so I think it's really deadly for some. There's a couple serial killers have this, Jeffrey Dahmer and Clifford Olson, a couple major serial killers. It's that no impulse control. Now, these guys probably have really heavy afflictions going on there. Some of the warriors have this as well. Some military guy, Che Guevara, Robert Neller, who was a Marine general in the American side. I think some of these military guys too. I've always loved Che Guevara, right? Like, because he was a revolutionary, and they've got a nice picture of us. That's also the main picture you see of Che Guevara where he's fading. Who's that stencil artist did that fading version of Che Guevara? I loved it, right? He told a story about that. He's like, I was up on this bridge in the middle of the night, I had my harness on, and I was doing my revolutionary Che Guevara on the side of a bridge. All of a sudden, a car came roaring under the bridge, drove through, turned, smashed into some, like, I think it was a gun store. And they all hopped out of the car, looted the gun store, and the car drove out of the wall and drove away. And he was thinking, wow, a return of there's the real Che, right? There's the real revolutionary. Here I am thinking, it's like, I'm just this faded Che at the end, but here's the rebirth of Che smashing through the door. But anyways, that's still this Che Guevara. When I look at Uttara Bhadrapada and some of his positions, he's probably more like the right wing, sort of the conservative people. All that Che Guevara was a killer, he was a murderer, he probably was, actually. And some of these military guys are probably not that far off of the Clifford Olsons and the Jeffrey Dahmers, right? They get out on that battlefield, that sort of hunger probably feels like this sort of intense sort of hunger. They go into this fantasy world with their actions. And Mars can be very dangerous, right? Because it's very just boom and it's going. But we also get Paramahasa Yogananda, we get Catherine of Siena, these great mystics. She talked about a lot of the marriage with Jesus, and I can imagine she probably just sort of acted very impulsively as well. But there's there's a line here, right? Like everything we say about yoga is like control those impulses. But then we see Paramahasa Yogananda with this. No impulse control. We see Kriya Yoga saying, act spontaneous, get in touch with your Kriya, right? Purify your karmas so that they're just appearing in a spontaneous way. And so there's really two sides, especially these are dual nakshatras, dual positions. So there's really strong dualities to these positions like that. Really the ugliest serial killer and the most beautiful saint. It's wow, it's unreal. So after that, I like Justin Trudeau even less than I did before. By the way, after seeing this, you get the Rothschilds, kind of these people really had a lot of openness to live alternative life. These Reinhard Heydrich, the SS secret police guy, like how much more? Well, the serial killer and the military man, right? Very fine line between the hero and the villain, I guess you could say. Isambard, he was one of these early civil engineers doing a lot of bridges, doing a lot of work with steel and structural stuff like that. I sort of, as I was looking at his chart and all of this, I got a bit of this image of this man. He's not paying attention to his actions at all, right? And you can imagine these old industrial sites, the cranes, and they're lifting all this steel and stuff. And this was the kind of guy, he wasn't watching. He was walking under these massive piles of steel being craned. There's sort of this vision as well of like walking out on the bridge, on the spans of bridges. And when you do that, I think too, that heightened sense of danger and stuff is you go into the zone where you're not thinking anymore, right? And so you're just walking out on these spans. It's incredibly dangerous, but you're just kind of in the zone, right? It's like the basketball players. It's like it becomes a kind of meditation, just bouncing the ball, or Cristiano Ronaldo, the soccer player. I can imagine kicking his ball against the wall or sort of bouncing it off his foot or whatever these guys do. But they go into the zone that's almost like beyond meditation, right? Where it's all happening automatically. Like Zakiro's saying, hitting the drum, like no human being can move their hand that fast. It's impossible. Watch it. It can't. It's impossible, man. And so it's like that. And so you also get these sort of like, the Mars here, I think, is that sort of like that busting the move in a sense, where you're not thinking anymore. It's that like that soccer player that just like does this incredible move and the whole crowd goes, "Wow, that's impossible." Right? Or the basketball player, Emmett's already knows his name, Jabbar. Anyways, I don't know any of these people. I don't know any, but it's the same thing.
He's a yogi.
Pardon me?
He's a yogi.
Oh, he is a yogi as well?
Yep.
Okay. But I can quite imagine while he's out on the basketball, he's probably busted moves out there that just like blew people away. And so that's that Mars activity, that fantasy, that wow. Emmett, please tell me your story.
Yes. So Kareem Abdul-Jabbar actually has probably the most legendary basketball move, where it's called the Kareem Sky Hook. And it's a hook shot and no one can stop that. Like it's just everyone's looking at it, it's like, whoa, like what is that magic, kind of thing. And like he's the leading point getter in the history of basketball thanks to that move, because no one could stop it and it just blew everyone else out of the water. So
Okay.
yeah.
Well, I'm so glad you said that. The hook shot. We talked in Uttara Bhadrapada about this sort of like you're coming back around the curve. It's like just sort of hooked over. Uttara Bhadrapada, it's actually hooked, right? Purva, it's just the curve. It's maybe like you've cut off the barb and the end of the hook in a sense. And now this is that full hook. So you get a lot of the fishing and stuff here as well, right? You get the hook, that's so cool, the hook shot. And so all kind of, well, even someone like Herman Oberth that was dealing with rocketry, and especially in those early days, that's a lot of what they were doing, is that they were sending this thing around a planet, and then the gravity would pull it. It would hook, kind of, right? And that hook would kind of pull it back around. And so I'm really glad you brought that up, because I remember thinking of the hook earlier through Uttara Bhadrapada, but I couldn't quite make the connections here. But there we go. Justin Trudeau as well. He did the whitewater rafting. I think he's probably a bit of a fisherman. His father was big into canoeing, right? This was why everybody loved Trudeau Senior. God, it's too many words and names go through my head. I can't remember them when they come up. Anyways, Trudeau Senior Parliament would take a break, and that guy would like hop in his canoe in the Mackenzie River, which is way in northern Canada, way in the middle of nowhere. And so I can quite imagine he probably brought his son on a lot of these canoe trips. And in Canada, I can't even pronounce it anymore. I'm really not a Canadian. But in Canada, when you when you go canoeing, you better believe you probably have a fishing rod in that boat, especially when you're way up north and eating and cooking on the fire and living the dream as well, right? Also, another thing in canoeing is the J stroke. And that's sort of how you keep your boat straight, actually, by using that J stroke, and then your canoe is not, right, zigzagging all over the place. Still zigzags a bit, but so yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the hook, because it really comes up. It's interesting then too, you look at someone like Reinhard Heydrich, the SS police, right? This is the dual hook. And of course, then you can see how well an SS turns into a swastika as well. Which is kind of how the Nazis, I think, came to it. So wow. Yeah, the hook really, I'm glad you mentioned that. It really brought up a whole lot for us to kind of look at here. So this might also, well, let's go back up and see what I just jumped over. Probably not much. So we got our queen thing. Purva and Uttara, they're also considered twins. They call them the scorching pair. And that's some of that. I think that's because it's like all traces of the individuality are kind of being burnt off here, in a sense, is what's happening here. This is the birth star of Karuna. Karuna was the son of the sun in the Mahabharata. He was a very interesting character, outcast and exile. These things also sort of, well, exile maybe more than outcast, relates with Uttara Bhadrapada, but he kind of ended up fighting against all his own brothers, in a sense. I think you get a little bit, it's like everything gets sort of bunched together in a sense here like that, but he fought on the side of Kauravas because they were good to him. He sort of, this is an interesting story actually. He sort of knew the Pandavas were in the right, you could say, in the end, and everything sort of got explained to him in the end, and he sort of realized the Pandavas were in the right in the whole war. But he said, well, the Pandavas were never good to me. But the Kauravas, the sort of side of what you might call the side of the Asuras, in a sense, they were always good to them. They always trusted them. They were always nice to them. And this is sort of something that comes up a lot in all the stories between the Devas and the Asuras, in a sense, between the sides of good and evil. The side of good are always kind of bastards, and the side of evil are kind of the ones who are always sort of good to people. It's like Venus is an Ashura. Venus is all about peace, right? Jupiter is all about justice. Well, I don't know. Peace is kind of a little bit nicer than justice in a lot of ways. This is also, we have to think, this is where Venus is also becoming exalted here. And so it is all about, more about that Ashura side is sort of more exalted in this position. It's ruled by Saturn as well. Saturn doesn't do great here. He's not bad because he rules it, and he does well with these sort of, he brings a bit of discipline to all of this, which sort of helps. But otherwise, Saturn's not very happy here because nothing's really sticking together. It's too broad for him, in a sense. But Kauravas is I think what we're getting to here, and it's really been happening through a few nakshatras, it's that reversal of things. It's that kind of mirror image of reality, I guess you could say. And so there is a bit of that reversal going on here. And so in this position, the Kauravas are sort of the Ashuras are the great ones. So, and we talked about issues with just impulse control and things like that. Sneaky kind of dissolved sort of nature. Even a lot of what they do, like that moon being here. Let's just jump to that. It's interesting as well, who talked about, there are very few people. You see my list of people with Ascendant who talked about it. There's hardly anyone there. It's a very small list. This says December 1st, but I've been adding tons all the way through this. Very few people with Uttara Bhadrapada. I don't know if that's like, it's because they don't come out of the closet sort of idea. They tend to remain sort of hidden away, or if they just don't live. Emmett, go ahead.
It's the Perseus thing.
Yeah, well,
It's like it's always like that hero in the shadows kind of thing. And like just I'm looking at Shaquille O'Neal here as an example. Like he does a lot of stuff for society, and probably one of his biggest impacts in the world is he has affordable basketball shoes that he sells at Walmart so that everybody can have a basketball shoe to play basketball. Like he's that hero. So like if he wasn't huge and dominant, he never would have made it in the NBA. Like he wasn't great. He was just really big, you know? So it's like, but he's really more of an unsung hero than he is a basketball player. So, but it's thanks to his basketball player, he used that to kind of be like a great person at the end of the day.
yeah, that's
just an idea. Just
yeah, well, Hunter S. Thompson was similar to that as well. Like this. I wonder if Dana has anything to say about Uttara, but she might know somebody who has this position.
I was just telling Hinton, like, I'm looking at your Ascendant now, but everything we were talking about, like the identity, like nothing is personal, everything is universal. And for example, it had in my partner, at least like that capacity of never being offended.
Okay.
Like his identity is not attached to how others see him. Yes, maybe it's more difficult to find that identity because you are like, you could move at that unconscious idealistic level, all of that we are saying, but also there is a strength in that. And that strength that I see in him is a lot that not taking things personally, not falling into the shadow or projections of others. He just like lives in that world without having to or identify or let himself get swayed by projections. So I think that is the balance you can find. And that's why we have, and I think that's what you said before, and that's why with the Mars maybe, or with planets that are more fiery, let's say, you can have that duality of killers, right? It could be a serial killer or a military, but the archetype is killing.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter through which way it develops, right? And here in the Ascendant, it's like, it's the place of you can choose like your balance, like go here,
Well,
kind of thing. So Emmett will also know being Ascendant.
and you're saying killing too, and I think like one of the things that I'm doing is killing egos. Like I keep killing these egos to have all this detachment. So I'm killing this identity, killing that identity. Like I'm just always, and I do that for other people, where like I kill their egos. I kill the identities that they hold on to free them, you know, at the end of the day.
well, this was a little bit of the role of Perseus, right? He chopped off Medusa's head. And that's what we always, we always talk about that as being the identity, the place of identity.
I have to add something here because I just did Halloween. I dressed up as Poseidon, and the girl that I'm seeing dressed up as Medusa.
Perfect. Absolutely perfect. And so there is, yeah, they're kind of like, it's that energy of isolation and things like that. Someone like Towns Van Zandt, really, I have to say, he's one of my gurus. A lot of isolation he had. He really didn't get too much involved in the spotlight. Of course, there was also drugs involved, right? That dreamy fantasy world that sort of took him out of reality in that way. Tatiana Ma is interesting. She's kind of it's not a real, it's anyways, like modified name. Anyway, she's a big yogi in Canada here, doing a lot of the sound healing now, and that sort of stuff. But really a lot of what she does, her retreats and stuff, this is like Canadian West Coast yoga, really classic Canadian West Coast yoga, where when you go on a retreat, they really take you into this fantasy world, right? It's a lot, it's usually women's retreats, right? They dress up in these flowing sort of gowns and have got this, really a celestial kind of music playing. And it's very sort of celestial sort of experience that gets offered in that way. And so in that regard, when we come to yoga, very nice position for bhakti kind of yogas as well, with Uttara Bhadrapadas. And when I say bhakti yoga, this isn't like, I don't have boundaries when I say bhakti yoga. This is the person when they want to find some peace or something, they go out and they sit by the ocean and they look out over that nothingness, that great nothingness was wonderful. That's the best medicine for Uttara Bhadrapadas. And so they look out over that great nothingness and they feel a sense of peace, right? They get their meditation from that emptiness. And so very good for that. In that regards, then too, we want to get into, well, Buddhism, I want to say, because Buddhism is the main philosophy of emptiness. But I think it goes beyond that as well. It's like when we go into the tattvas, emptiness is kind of like the 28th tattva, for example. That might be the point of emptiness. And so then we want to, when we get into that emptiness, and here's the mirror image again, that spiritual mirror image of everything, we realize actually within the emptiness contains everything, sort of idea, right? So that's that Uttara Bhadrapada. That's like the imagination. It's an empty space, but within it, it contains everything. Someone like Mariah Carey as well. I think she was a little bit, I don't know, these people, I know these names from my childhood a little bit, but she also had almost a very celestial voice, right? A really, really beautiful, lovely voice she had, almost kind of unreal in a sense. But we get these poets, Hunter S. Thompson, his storytelling. These are like, I think the only thing I really know of Hunter S. Thompson, I used to listen to this when I was young. It was like a Junkie's Christmas. You'll probably find something like that on YouTube. So years ago, it was a cassette tape. I listened to it. But you can find the Junkie's Christmas. And so that was sort of Hunter S. Thompson's. Oh no, I'm confusing Thompson with another guy. God, I do that all the time. Just this big pool I've got, right? Like pulling names out of. But anyways, his stuff was very similar. What did he do? The Las Vegas one. There was a movie at the night Vegas and drugs and wow, wild, everything can happen. And so that was again very Uttara Bhadrapada kind of stuff. Someone like John D. Rockefeller, the Standard Oil guy, I think this just has also something to do with like penetrating the layers, right? There's a lot of the Maya here, but this is kind of the great Maya Devi, that all the layers are sort of together. And there's this penetration. You've gone through all the layers of Maya, the penetration of layers. And so someone like Rockefeller, who's doing drilling, is drilling down and going down through all of these sort of layers to get to the black gold, I guess, in this case. Larry Rand's also, he does a lot of work in the oil fields as well and stuff like that. Very isolated, works up in northern Canada as well. Very isolating place, an isolating thing. Nostradamus. See, when I see things like this, I'm like, maybe I have Nostradamus's correct birth time, right? If even the Ascendant God, this could be Nostradamus. Why not? And actually, a lot of his positions, I think, wow, maybe it is. Emmett, you were waving? Okay. So we get these kind of things. Let's look at his chart for fun. And then you can see what I chose for a birth time for Nostradamus. It might just be what I pulled off of, yeah, here it is, given time, 12 noon they gave. I got 12 noon. Usually I don't believe my 12 noon times because it's like that. So this gives us Nostradamus really out there dreaming with Rahu there, intense dreams, probably doing a few drugs to get into those dream states as well, with the Rahu ascendant. And I don't know if this is Nostradamus's chart, but this is what I would say from it. he's identified very closely with the nation, and so he'd be very close with the rulers and the elites. Sort of his leadership is from the home. This Jupiter and Saturn together connects all of these four houses at the end, well, beginning to the end, I guess. And so bringing a lot of transformation, a lot of changes kind of going into the home. Slow. For Nostradamus, Jupiter and Saturn here, massive house. You would almost think like a castle. The Saturn is there, making it stony and cold. Maybe he's living over on the side in the Punarvasu where they're training the animals, living over where they keep the elephants, maybe. Well, this is France, what century, 15th? Maybe they had some, but he maybe with the horses and where they're training, maybe he was staying over on that side of things. Jupiter and Mercury are making exchange, excellent for that. Sun is giving them powerful leadership. It's the sun in Sagittarius. And so that's really, that's that advisory leadership and advisory capacity in a sense. If this is correct, the Sun Mercury combination, he's like, I don't have Sun Mercury, so this is not exact very good combination, but it's a little bit like me in a sense. It's like that astrologer who never quite grows up. He's always a little bit youthful in a sense. They're both in Purva Shada, and so I don't know if he's the one that maybe he was molding and shaping the leaders, molding and shaping the kings in a sense, molding and shaping the governance structure, like that. Doing a lot of analysis. Mercury-Jupiter combination exchange is very, very powerful exchange for his leadership and his within the nation, especially. What else does he have? This chart puts this moon in the 8th house, also giving some psychic abilities and some occultism. Very sort of comfortable in that. Vishaka. Oh, well, that's the 5th house coming into this 8th as well. So expressing himself through all those mysteries and trying to bring things together, you could say the Vishak, like that. And so I don't know, this could very well be Nostradamus's correct birth time. It kind of looks all right. So that's, anyways, that's a little fun for us, right? We can play with this stuff. God is closer to us than water is to a fish. This is Catherine Sienna. This is Sun in Uttara Bhadrapada. She has, this is very Uttara Bhadrapada, right? The sun is closer to us than water to a fish. And that's really what the imagination, that's really what the whole Pisces is about. It's like you're just in that jello that contains everything. I look at it like this is a big Canadian thing. I don't know if it's a North American thing. At Christmas, our grandparents used to always torture us by putting fruit into jello and serving it at Christmas. And it's a god awful thing. They'd get like those canned maraschino cherries and just canned fruit. Oh, it was horrible. So anyways, but that's a little bit Uttara Bhadrapada is like a fruit jello. It's all just one thing, but there's still some distinction, right? It's not pushya, it's not completely dissolved yet. This is the stage of dissolution. So build yourself a cell in the heart and go there and pray. Oh my God, this cellularism, atomism, right? The atomic level of things is sort of here as well. Build yourself a cell in the heart. This is also like, we mentioned earlier, oh God, there's so much to this. So we mentioned earlier the chained woman, and so it has a lot to do with the chains, which are like these individual links that are linked together, right? And so these individual cells, in a sense, and Catherine Sienna talks about build yourself a cell in the heart where you go there to pray. And so that's the sun here. Elton John, when stars collide, you and I, no shadow blocks the sun. And so it's that stars are colliding and raining down that stardust. Like we're all just stardust, guys. That's really, we're at that level now. We're just dust of the universe. So if you fancy living in a despondent world of unending delusional bullshit, I really can't recommend cocaine highly enough. And so that's the drug side of this, right? The darker side of Uttara Bhadrapada, right? Living a despondent world, unending delusional bullshit. So that's the dark side of Uttara Bhadrapada. And so if you want that, I can't recommend cocaine highly enough. A psychologist would probably say that as a kid, I was trying to create a sense of order in a chaotic life. With my dad coming and going and the reprimands and rows, I didn't have control over that or over my mother's moods, but I had control over the stuff in my room. Objects couldn't do me any harm. I found them comforting. I talked to them. I behaved as if they had feelings. If something got broken, I'd really feel upset, as if I was killing something. This was also Elton John, right? This was his imagination, sitting in his room, talking to the objects in his room, just living in this imaginary world. Very much like that. So that's the sun here. Oh yeah, we got like Captain Kirk and Dr. Spock both have this, right? They're living up their stardust, man. They're living in another world. Be good at meditation and visualization. If other positions favor this, they become a kind of a cosplay, a dress up from another time, from a dream and fantasy world. Witches, warlocks, aliens, ghouls, people harking back to ancient times. This is just how they like to express themselves. How many people have dressed up like Captain Kirk and Dr. Spock? I would say the sun entitles you to such a fantasy expressions. The inner quest of many of these people brings them into psychology, mythology, avant-garde art, dream world. They might seek to build as architects, as theater workers, or even as Harry Weinstein did, create a kind of fantasy island. This is another thing, like that idea of like a fantasy island. Now, this is more, I think, more kind of the Henry Weinstein or the Epstein kind of fantasy island going on in Uttara Bhadrapada. But there's a bit of a line. This is very close to like when Pinocchio went to the circus, for example, right? And all the other kids were getting turned into donkeys, and Pinocchio barely escaped from that circus. That was more the Purva Bhadrapada circus fantasy, really. But as we see here, this can also happen. You still get that sort of fantasy island kind of idea here, that closed off space where you get far away from everything, where you can do whatever you want, like that. And so we get into and the supply chain are essential to some big business owners who have this sun. Sam Walton, the founder of Walmart, Crampad, who founded IKEA. Brian Maroney also had some shipping and freight stuff. A couple geologists have this sun. We talked about penetrating the layers. Now, Sam Walton, that's Walmart. Crampad, that's IKEA guy. Okay, this is the supply chains. We also sort of get these ideas, the blockchain stuff as well comes out of Uttara Bhadrapada. Any of these chains, when a whole bunch of individual things are being linked together to make one big, strong thing. And this is like, you can look at the chain in a sense as like the chain. Again, I'll allude to Canadian, like in Canada, the main thing I've used chains for is to help pull people out of the mud. And so that's in a sense with that Purva Bhadrapada and Satabhishak, right? It was that really dark, sticky mud. And I get the sense that broader fantasy, that bigger opening the mind helps to pull us out of that mud, helps if we think the lotus, right? The lotus is growing up out of that mud, and it gets us sort of like in Purva Bhadrapada, there's like this like a crack in the wall, letting some light through, and it's grabbing and it grows onto that. And as it gets into an Uttara Bhadrapada, it's starting to really come out of that. So it's a little bit like the umbilical cord as well. When I was studying the paradoxical animals, there was a really great one in there. And it was a plant that looked like a sheep. And so anyways, but it was attached to the stem and the stalk that went up to it. So it's that umbilical, it's that stem, it's that stalk that still connects to something else. And so we think also in the development of the fetus, this is very much, this is really another womb of the universe. I know there's Berani and Mula, and there's wombs, but I'm gonna, anyways, this is really another womb of the universe where that fertility happens, but there's still that connection to the umbilical. And is a lot of like, Emmett brought up the charitableness of some of these people, and there's a lot of nourishment going on in Uttara Bhadrapada. It's very nourishing spot. This is like, I don't know, the nourishment. This is, well, I don't know, this is what's growing out of the shit, right? This is what's coming out of the mud. It's a very nourishing and sort of growing and yeah, it's like, again, the plug is in, and so the water is rising, and in that way it is an upward moving sort of nakshatra. Emmett, did you wave?
Yeah, to add on too, like to bring back the hook, where like the hook takes the fish out of the water as well, where like the water is deep, dark, it's in pure imagination, but then you get that hook to kind of bring out. It's like removing from the mud, removing from the depths of the ocean, but like that's how you can see the light. That's how you can see the sun. If you're stuck in the deep depths of the ocean, you can't see that light. You're just always consumed by illusions, moving currents, like, what was that? You know how fish get scared kind of thing. But then there's the illusion. I'm just picturing the flying fish when they come out of the water and they're going towards the sun kind of thing, where a flying fish is someone who can rise above. And it's just like Uttara Bhadrapada is kind of maybe that energy that allows you to go up above. And like, again, just to use Shaquille O'Neal as like offering those shoes to underprivileged kids to play basketball, it's giving them hope at something higher than the shit that they're in with an affordable pair of shoes kind of thing.
Well, it's this, I don't know, is it Jesus? They sometimes call Jesus the fisher of souls, right? That sort of idea. It's
And that's very interesting.
yeah, so there is this fisher of souls. There is this, like, the bottom being connected with the top as well. It's like the highest basketball player is down there hooking some of the lowest people and trying to pull them up, right? Pull them out of the mud. Go ahead, Dana.
When you were talking about this and everything is relating now, it actually made me think of Marija Jambutas, you know, this archaeologist woman that studied like the goddess religions up to the past. And she used to say like the womb and the tomb. So it could be perfectly Uttara Bhadrapada, like the womb and the tomb kind of aspect of reality. It's like, it's that same, again, archetypal energy, because birth and death are the same energy in the end until it goes on. Then about the fish, it's very interesting because yes, in old primitive Christianism, when Christianism was pursued, like not the official religion, the symbol for Christ was a fish. But also in the Sarasvati Indus Valley, in one of the seals that appears actually the seven sisters, which we could relate with Kritika, actually in that seal, you can see a fish, because one of the first symbols of the Great Mother, the womb and tomb, was a fish with a dot in the center. And it was like that idea of wholeness. And psychologically, how I'm relating to Uttara Bhadrapada and how it could work in people is this idea of disassociation or dissociation. I don't know how you say in English. That capacity of getting out of yourself, and actually it's a survival mechanism. So when you are like in that trauma response and you dissociate, it's some kind of a new rebirth into a new reality of imagination that keeps you actually alive for your psyche. So I think that's why maybe the drugs come into here. It's some kind of dissociative behavior from reality, and sometimes it's spontaneous and sometimes it's like on purpose, maybe whatever reason.
Disassociation, oh, they were just talking about this in Law and Order yesterday. But this disassociation, it is very much, it's very much like, it can be like a death of the self as well, right? And it is that, like, you just can't cope with with everything you've seen, you can't cope with yourself anymore. And so you kill it in a sense and go into this sort of into this alternate reality.
And
So
as I've used marijuana as a healing herb, and what that's helped me done is really disassociate from my go 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 programming at the end of the day. So, and through the use of it, I've disassociated more and more from the program that was instilled to me as I was young to always go 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 kind of thing. So that's where luckily I'm a Capricorn, and I was able to stay kind of grounded through it and not lose myself in it. But because like for me, when I smoked, I was able to dissociate and I'd keep working. So I stay productive kind of thing. But then eventually with time, I was able to spend enough time outside of society, outside of the world, in the nothingness, to see what I was doing when I was in the ocean of the illusion that society kind of creates. So it's like I hooked myself out with the help of marijuana or of substances, and people need different levels of substances and spaces to be able to get themselves to that level of disassociation to see what they are or how they're wired. So yeah, that's a great point.
I just I know one person in this town I'm in, and I haven't seen him in 20 years. He was like a younger, when I used to work construction, he came to work for us. He was kind of a younger guy, really inexperienced and always made mistakes. And anyways, we should have fired him 6 times over, but I really liked him for some reason. And so I never fired him. I always made sure I found something he could do. And I was always very patient with him. And he kind of one of these few people that sort of he's kept in touch a little bit over the years, kind of followed what I've been doing and stuff like this. And I just talked to him, I think about a year ago. And he's one of these guys he has been very much stuck in society and doesn't never had much of his own personality, in the sense that kind of dry and always sort of did what he had to do or what was expected of him. And kind of nerdy and anyways like this. And so he also recently too went to South America, and he did this big trip all the way through. And of course he did a ayahuasca trip. And oh my God, he's a completely different person. I can't believe it. And I've sort of said that about ayahuasca. I've never done ayahuasca myself. I've never really felt that strong need, but I do see the benefits for it, especially for the people that are very much locked up in society and locked up in that side of things. And again, as they're moving out of Capricorn and trying to get out of the mud, right? To use some kind of medicinal substance to kind of, in a sense, I think there's a bit between both Bhadrapadas. It's like an egg being cracked open a little bit, right? It's cracked in Purva, and then it opened in Uttara, in a sense. And so we need that sometimes to crack us open and get in there. They sometimes talk about that even in spiritual circles as well. They use that sort of idea of got to crack yourself open, got to get inside and get into the depth of it. So like that. You can read some of those quotes later. Let's see what Ibsen has to say. Was the majority right when they stood by while Jesus was crucified? Was the majority right when they refused to believe that the earth moved around the sun and let Galileo be driven to his knees like a dog? It takes 50 years for the majority to be right. The majority is never right until it does right. That was Ibsen, in a sense, kind of complaining about majority rule sort of idea. And I think that's starting to happen too, that idea of majority rule. The lessons are being learned about that here, right? That's sort of that idea of the majority rule is being left behind. And now we got to not go from majority to the universal. It's a subtle shift, but it's a dissolution, I guess, of the individuals that make up the majority, I guess you could say. You really have to sin to be serious about it. And you really do, in a sense. If you're really serious about sinning, you almost do have to try a little bit. You got to put effort. It almost doesn't seem to happen naturally to us. So anyways, to live is to war with trolls. These days we got internet trolls. In a sense, these are kind of the same as those trolls. There is a bit of that sense of this is a little bit where you've come to the toll booth in the road, in a sense, where you've come to the trolls and you're dealing with a lot of trolls in your imagination, right? It's these sort of, the troll is the one, he comes to you, you have to answer the riddle before you can get past the troll. Right? So that's kind of what's happening in these Bhadrapadas anyways, is you've come to that puzzle, that riddle, and you've got to answer that riddle before you can move past it. We talked about like with the callings in life. Life feels like it's calling you somewhere. And so now you're at that sort of stage of sorting that out and figure out what the calling is. You've got to, it's never direct. God doesn't say, Mike, you have to be an astrologer and write a book, right? All the way along the line, though, I've been getting these little signs and symbols, and sometimes it's like a lot of synchronicity, you could say, in the Bhadrapadas as well. And those synchronicities are sort of what tell you that you're going in the right direction, right? And you don't know. It's just like, oh, I don't know. It seems like life is telling me to go that way. And if you're wrong, life has a way of telling you that pretty quick as well, right? And we fight that a lot of times, and we say, no, this is the right path. It's sometimes hard to tell if life is telling you you're wrong, this is the wrong way to go, or if life is saying, oh, how bad do you want it? And so it's kind of a fine line between that. That's a little bit like the same as like the serial killer, and it's that duality, right? It's like within the same thing, it can be a sign I'm going in the right way, or it can be a sign I'm going in the wrong way, right? And so there's a lot of everything's sort of left up to a lot of interpretation here. Excellent position for like literary majors, right? Poets, people who are studying literature. If they've got a bit, Dana mentioned Kritika. If they got a little bit of Kritika and a little bit of Uttara Bhadrapada, like these guys are literary majors for sure. They're just literary critics, you could say. So Ibsen, The Dollhouse, Nora has this to say: I must stand on my own 2 feet if I'm get to know myself and the world outside. That's why I can't stay here with you any longer. Anyways, so it's leaving. It's like I've got to go and be alone. I've got to go and be on my own. And that's a strong thing. But you know, talking about their partner, they go off and they be on their own, but they've always have a connection still. They maintain a life, what did they call it? A life cable, I guess. Like the old divers of old days, they got in the big suit and the tube always stayed connected to them. And that's kind of, there's always that connection. So they go and be themselves, and it's like Walden's pawn. He's very famous. Thoreau's very famous for going off and living alone. But when you really look at that, his mother brought him lunch every single day, right? So this was, again, his fantasy world of being alone. He still had that life raft, that life connection. So
sorry, I just wanted to add, but I don't know if it's for here or for Purva Bhadrapada, from what you just said about the toll and like asking the questions and all that, like the Sphinx.
yeah,
The Sphinx is an animal made of like different animals with and also asks the questions. So I don't know if you had it already added, or maybe you want to
yeah, no,
think about it.
definitely the Sphinx is another one. Very similar. Tell us more about the Sphinx. It was also dealt with riddles somehow. Do you know?
Yeah, exactly. It was Oedipus. I don't know the words in English so well, but he was like, his father had a kid, and they told him like his kid was going to kill him. So he abandoned it and he grew up somewhere else. But that's how life works, like synchronicities of life. Oedipus had to go back to the kingdom. So he encounters the Sphinx. And to pass by the Sphinx, she gives him a riddle, which is which animal crawls in 4 legs in the morning, stands in 2 feet at midday, and lies on the ground in the night. And like the answer was the human being in the 3 stages of life. Like when you're a kid, you crawl on 4, like you're crawling. When you're an adult, you're walking. And then when you die, you're lying down. So he passes, and then the story ends up being like he does kill his father. And then it all happens with that Oedipus complex with Electra. All that goes into the story later, you know. But yeah, the Sphinx was like he had to pass through there, like it was his destiny, or the synchronicities took him there.
Yeah.
So maybe she's related with Purva Bhadrapada because of the animals. And then the Uttara part is when he goes towards that duality of I'll kill my father and find my own identity because he didn't know he was the king, and then marries his own mother, like all that duality kind of aspects in Uttara Bhadrapada kind of thing, maybe.
Yeah, that's
I don't know.
yeah, that's a perfect examples. We get other characters here, like someone like Michelangelo is also very interesting. He spent a lot of his time way up in the ceiling and the rafters, right? And that's where he even expressed himself by quite literally painting the heavens, this grand dreamscape. Joseph Campbell as well. A lot of them, Eugene Herrigo was Zen and archery kind of stuff. He really brought Zen from Japan, one of the first ones to bring it to the UK, I believe. That sort of thing. Andrew Lloyd Webber, the theater stuff. I think he's the guy that did Cats and some of those like really, really incredible sort of theater productions. And so just beautiful imaginations. But a lot of them, again, they are trying to unravel these mysteries. Even Leonard Nimoy and the other guy, the Captain Kirk, they were also, a lot of that show was they kind of had these little, every episode was another little mystery to sort of unravel. And again, dealing with all the fantastic creatures of that. Bum, bum, bum. Lady Gaga, not a big surprise to see her here. Geologists I've sort of mentioned. Dana mentioned archaeologists as well, of course, which of course makes perfect sense. Anyways, going down and deep and unraveling the mysteries of the past, I guess, is a really big part of all of this. I've also seen we'll get that. Where is it? Fourth pada? Yeah, sorry, fourth house. The sun in the fourth house. We see Michelangelo there. Some of the other people I've known, they often they've lived like near the Apollo temples in Varanasi and Kashi, the city of light. So these kind of cities and places where it's usually there's some worship of the water there. There's some healing springs, some healing waters, some special places to take baths. And so I noticed that, especially with the sun in the fourth house here, probably get some version of that with the different planets in the fourth house in Uttara Bhadrapada. But I came to this. Michelangelo is a stone cutter. I think some of this relates. He's got some Purva Bhadrapada placements as well. But his father also was kind of a banker. I think oftentimes the fathers of Sun and Uttara Bhadrapada, the fathers are often distant, often away. But it would be the father who's giving money, right? Because there's still that lifeline, there's still that connection, that's still that nourishment coming from the father. Even though there might not be a lot of connection, they're still quite distant that way. This sort of stuff comes up. See what else we got here. We're again seeing with the sun here, we're seeing some of these powerful military people, still more of these SS. Albert Speer, he was an SS, he was in charge of armaments. Derek Chauvin, that's the cop who killed the guy that started Black Lives Matter. So you get some of this sort of, it's like I don't know if they take their authority for granted a little bit too when sun is in Uttara Bhadrapada. Again, they're not fully connected to it. It's kind of, it's diluted somehow. Barron Trump has this. I think that's Trump's youngest son. Maybe he's 18 now. Harvey Weinstein, Harry Babson. A good example of this, Harry Babson with the experimental jazz type stuff. Some of these folks. Yeah, okay. Yeah, get some really great poets. Michelangelo, Thomas Wolsey, Heinrich Ibsen, these kind of characters, just really, really strong and poets. Some of these people, like we see Masters of Commerce, Rodney as well was into something to do with the stock market stuff. The numbers, the blockchain kind of idea, I think, is coming out through there. B.F. Skinner, a couple of these other people who wrote books about like utopia, right? Books about writing about the perfect world. B.F. Skinner, if you've never read his book, great book. B.F. Skinner, who's the other fellow? Oh God, I don't know. There was a whole bunch of them. It was like a style of literature that was going on for the time. And we should look up that time period because there's probably a significant placement of something like Pluto or something like that going on there. Anyways, so that blockchain stuff, the logistics and stuff like that, that connection and moving stuff. Get the moon here. It's when obstacles do not seem to be present that is most important to be on our guard. Nothing is more fraught with danger than to mistake a temporary state for a permanent one. We must expect cycles of clarity and confusion. Recognition that falls from clarity may be more disturbing than a state of no clarity at all. When obstacles appear, it's necessary to advance toward a state of reflection to reduce their impact and prevent them from taking over. So what he's kind of saying is it's like moving to that state of reflection, that state of deep contemplation. I don't know if this is, I would say the main technique of meditation that Mark Dyczkowski has taught me is contemplation. This is that state. I'm not sure if this is Uttara Bhadrapada, but it's like you've filled yourself with knowledge. And I should really do this at the end of my class. He does it all the time. You fill yourself with knowledge for 2.5 hours, and then you just sit in meditation for about a half hour is what we do with Mark. But that's that sort of like, just let it all absorb. Let it all mix and blend together on its own. So that when it's like spirituality, it's like, again, some of the early ways we connect with spirituality, it's by copying. We look at these other spiritual people. We look at Mama. Oh, Mama's namasteing to God. Oh, Mama's waving an incense stick. Oh, how do I? Oh, like that. You know, how do I? You don't know anything. You just copy what you think. Oh, they're connected to God. I'll do what they do. Right. And so that's sort of like the Bhadrapadas is that copying and then that imitation. You're starting just now to kind of make that copying your own, right? It's like the first time I wave the incense stick, I'm copying something I've seen. The 100th time, the 1000th time, we talked about the repetition, the 1000th time I wave that incense stick, I'm not really copying anymore. I've kind of waving incense my own thing. And that's really what we're kind of trying to do with a lot of this knowledge is we don't want to copy it. That's the early sign of our learning, right? You guys take this class and you take your summary and you take your notes and then you make a web page of Uttara Bhadrapada and you say, this is Uttara Bhadrapada, and you've just kind of copied me. But then after a while, you do it for your web page and then you do it for Instagram and you do it for Facebook and you do it this year and you do it next year. And you've copied it like 50 times. And now you're not copying anymore, right? You actually kind of, you know it. It's become a part of who you are. I would sort of add to that. And the experience I've been getting, especially as I come to the end of this research thing, and really, I would say, especially when I'm teaching courses like this, all my courses are a journey. They're like a pilgrimage in and of themselves. I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. I don't know what I'm going to teach you, right? But I make an outline and I make a guide and I say, okay, guys, here's where we're going to go. Do you want to come with me? I think I'm a pretty good guide. I think I can show you some neat stuff along the way. I don't know everything. I'll make mistakes. That's your job to sort that out. I'm sorry. But it's a journey, right? Now we're kind of coming to the end of that journey. I don't know. It's like that beginning and the end of the journey, both, right? And so we're coming to the end point, I'll say it this time, where it's all kind of, where it's not copying anymore. It's all diluted. It's becoming somewhat authentic, somewhat. it's still, you're just waving an incense stick, so it's still not a big deal. But sooner as we move along, we'll make it more and more your own. And that's what we want to do with the knowledge. It's what we want to do with our yoga practice. It's like you learn a system of yoga and the teacher says, okay, you do this and then you do that and that, and you learn the sequence and you copy and you practice and you look at Paramahansa Yogananda and you look how he sits and you go, oh, I'm going to sit just like Paramahansa Yogananda. And you do all this, you keep doing it, it starts to become your own. And so I was going to say time is moving very, very slow through this section of the nakshatras, but time has almost become an illusion in Uttara Bhadrapada now, and that's really what it is. It's that reverse, that what you can't imagine is true is actually what's true. So anyway, so then where our mind is blowing a little bit. So TKV Deskacharya, he was one of the big yoga gurus, or the son of a big yoga guru, and then he became a yoga guru. So if you're wondering who he is. So again, we get more people working with rockets. Jack Parsons, that's a different rocket engineer. And I don't know if it's the hook. I don't know if it's like them going off into space and all of that stuff. It's a little bit of that energy of Star Trek, to go where no man has gone before. Is a big part of it. And so you got that whole space stuff. Johnny Gottslick, he's one of my ancestors. My ancestor has his name on a Stanley Cup. But really he came from no man's land. He kind of came from Crimea, actually, which was very much been a no man's land forever in a lot of ways. But he came from Crimea, but he was a male coach of female hockey. And so I kind of laughed, thinking, like, how many times did that go where no man's gone before, in a sense, right? Really got this insight into women. And people think he's great, and all the women said he was wonderful. So there's not really any controversy with him. But I'm sure there was a lot of jokes. Maybe he's dead now even. Anyways, old guy, right? He won the Stanley Cup in the 40s, I think it was. So very old, but again, probably had a lot of jokes about going where no man had ever gone before that way. Will Smith, even he did some of those shows where he's killing aliens and dealing with space, Men in Black, I think it was. Usain Bolt, right? Record breakers. They're sort of comfortable going where no man has gone before, you could say. That's the moon. That's the culture they grow up in. The sun, that's kind of how they express themselves, right? I guess you could say, but the moon, that's the whole sort of culture that they're involved in. You get saying Bhagat Singh, he was considered a freedom fighter, but he was a cop killer. He blew shit up. John Wayne Gacy, serial killer, going where no man had gone before. In a sense, it's like this Uttara Bhadrapada. It's like, God, these people, they really do the unimaginable. You would never, like O.J. Simpson, right? The killing and then the whole glove thing. And it was just unreal what we saw happen. I don't know if he was a great football player and also busted moves like that, but he was in this world where sort of anything was possible. Like that. Hillary Clinton also sort of working up there. Kim Kardashian, the Kardashian show. I just saw a picture, came up on my all online stuff. The Kardashians before they learned about plastic surgery. There's a picture of that going on there. And you get like Lana Wachowski. Polish names are tough, man. But anyways, sort of this transgender gaming science fiction sort of a character. Again, that going where no man has gone before also sort of connects us with some of the transgender thing, those fantasy ideas where, like, I don't know, the head of Google's diversity department believed she was a deer. All of those kind of things will come into here as well. We got some kind of with leadership as well. Otto von Habsburg, the Habsburg dynasty, Emperor Wu of Han. These people started new empires. In some cases, it was a little bit of Venusian energy. They connected everybody together. I think partially it's like maybe it's some of that idea. I don't know if there's a lot of economics here, but there is some. It's that idea is if we're connected by economics, then there'll be peace. That was kind of the promise of globalism, for example. It's like we'll trade with people, we'll open our borders and allow products to move, and by connecting through things, we'll connect through spirit. And so there's a lot of that sort of going on here. David Koch, he was working with those sort of chemical stuff. But again, corporate sort of heads. Again, I think going where no man has done, doing these kind of impossible sort of things. Brian Mulrooney, his big scandal was an Airbus scandal as well, right? Things of the sky, things of the underground, right? Both those areas become AOC, like Moon and Uttara Bhadrapada. AOC, everybody, like a lot of people don't take her seriously as a politician. In a sense, even the people that support her don't take her seriously as a politician. It's kind of why they support her, right? Because it's like, oh, you're not a politician. I'll support you. That's wonderful. So there's a bit of that going on here. The myth of some of these people are also kind of bigger than life. Their myth is much bigger than who they are. It's like Emmett was saying earlier. It's like a lot of cases we've defined who these people are, kind of thing. They don't care what you think. They're not going to define themselves for you. It's kind of, I think, at least in the higher cases, they kind of know inside. They're not concerned what you think, right? It's that sort of idea. Wade Davies is interesting here. He's another one of my big gurus. You can find speeches and stuff on Wade Davies. Great books as well. He just retired, actually, which is too bad because I kept thinking to write him a letter and saying he should be I want to do my PhD under you. Because he was one of those crazy guys that he would take me as a student, I'm sure. But he retired. And now he's putting a lot of his efforts towards the coca leaf. Actually, he spent a lot of time with the tribals in Central America and wrote on them. It's like an ethnobotanist, right? Where culture and plants meet. And so if you're into herbalism, like that's your guy. Beautiful, amazing book. You can find what is that? X something, where they do all the speeches and people go on and tell their different stories. X, anyways, years ago I used to watch that kind of stuff.
And TEDx, right? Or TED Talks, TEDx, or those
Talks.
ones, right? Yeah.
TED Talks is the main one, and then they have the mini ones, which are TEDx. I've actually had a lot of people tell me I should go speak at a TEDx thing, that they would like my kind of thing. And then I say, well, you arrange it and I'll go speak. And they say, yeah, I'll arrange everything for you. As you can see where that's gone for me. So, but it is anyways, that's all that sort of stuff comes in here. There's Zakir Hussein again.
Can we look at the Salvador Dali's chart?
What's that?
Can we look at Salvador Dali's chart?
Salvador Dali. Oh, there's a there's an Uttara Bhadrapada character, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So,
and also about the myth being bigger than the person. Like, of course, he was very like that, but the myth about him, and especially like in Spain, and
yeah, very, very much. I sort of noticed that, and I don't know, this is more of a Pushan type energy, but I really noticed that, and I don't know if I have Pushan, but I really noticed this, say, when I'm hitchhiking, right? And you're standing by the side of the road, you can see the kids, right? They're looking out the window like this at you. But everywhere you go, people just apply a myth to you, right? And some people hate hitchhikers, and some people, well, they think they're like Bubba's kind of idea, right? And so there's that whole, and it has absolutely nothing to do with the person standing on the side of the road. This is our reality. It has nothing to do with any of those sense objects that are doing it. Our reality is our own making. It's our own myth. And so here's Salvador Dali. What's he got? Ketu and Moon and Uttara Bhadrapada here. And his Jupiter is going into Navati then. And so this is his reputation. This is what he's known for. Let me just look at his birth time. Chart notes. Anyways, this one gave an AA rating. That's not always correct either, but so we can trust this a little bit. So there's his job, maybe that Ketu and Moon, right? That sort of watery, mystical sort of expression that he's known for. In Uttara Bhadrapada, very fantasy. The Jupiter, then he's in Ravati, he's in his own sign. Jupiter and Moon, very powerful combination to have. That kind of stuff. And then we sort of look, and here's one of the questions I have for you guys. Okay, so if we look here, we see that his ascendant lord Mercury is going into the 12th house. It's in 0, it's in about 1 degree of the 12th house. Now here's the question I want to ask. So if he has planets in the first degrees of his 12th house, would that then be the energy of Purva Bhadrapada being mixed with, well, it's in the nakshatra of Kritika, but it's in the part of the 12th house that's very similar to Purva Bhadrapada. And then so the whole middle part of the 12th house, then, does that mean we can kind of treat it as if it's Uttara Bhadrapada? Similar energy as that, right? And so now I'm getting way out there, right? Like we're just crossing every which line we can here. But to me, that seems like it's like, well, why not? Right? And so we're in Uttara Bhadrapada, I can cross those lines. We can play with these sorts of ideas. The other thing I was looking at that really came into view here, well, I'm going to open up the Mars one because this is where it came to me. The Mars and Uttara Bhadrapada, and I was thinking about this, right? Because this Mars and Uttara Bhadrapada, it's making a lot of problems for people, really. It's not a very comfortable position. And so we need remedies. We need remedies for all of these positions because they can all act good or bad in a sense. And so it was like, well, what is the remedy for this Mars and Uttara Bhadrapada? And I thought, well, the obvious remedy is, and the one everybody that everybody would say is that these people need some discipline. Right? So you need some discipline in your life. They have none, right? They're just running off and doing all kinds of stuff. And so that's what makes the military person. It's like you need discipline. And it's a little bit, that's really hard medicine. But they need it. It's like the opposite of who they are, but I'm sorry, that's always what we need. So they need that sense of discipline to come into them. But again, that leads them more towards that militaristic side of things. Because to discipline a Mars and Uttara Bhadrapada, the only way you're going to discipline these people really is with threats, right? Because they can't sit still. They're not going to sit still. You can offer him candy and he's going to be like, oh, wow, I really want to sit still. They're not going to sit still until you pick up a stick and you say, you move and I'm going to fucking beat you. And then they're like, okay. And so... So Saturn remedies aren't very pleasant, right? It's that really harsh. It's like sending the hyperactive kid to military school. Tough position. And so then I thought, well, what about Venus? Venus is exalted here. And then you get these really great artists, right? And so why not art therapies for people who have these kind of things? And I'm saying like Mars and Uttara Bhadrapada, but there's other things that have very similar energy. Right? This is very specific placement, but there's so many other things in this world that give that hyperactivity that's very similar to this energy of Mars and Uttara Bhadrapada. So really, this is, I think, art therapy is probably one of the best things for them. Or as well, Jupiter is the ruler of this. And so then if we start to think about remedying any of these placements, then we have to say, well, why not use the exalted planet? If you can, why not use the planets that rule that sign to help remedy the problems of that sign, right? So there's one big way we can start to figure out how to remedy different placements. The other thing that becomes very, very obvious, this has been obvious for a long time, but while we're speaking of remedies, this is a good place to speak about remedies. I think a lot of remedies in Uttara Bhadrapada. But the other way we can think of the remedies is we have to get them to make the full circle. I was doing an astrology reading the other day, and the client had Virgo ascendant. They said, "Oh yeah, I'm Virgo ascendant, so I'm going to Pisces." And so this is normally how we think of it. We start here, and it's a common way to think, and we're going to there. That's to be a full person, we have to go from our ascendant to seventh house. And we have to make that, but that's actually, now we're just a full person. Now to move fully around, that person has to dissolve, right? It's like I'm always saying, find out who you are as a human being on this world, fully incorporate, fully become seated in yourself. And then once you do that, then you start to, you find out who you are as a universal person, as I am Shiva, right? So that first half of it is really, but we have to move full circle to complete the energy, to heal, to get the full healing. We've got to move the full circle. And so that's kind of what the energy of this Uttara Bhadrapada, it's coming around that full circle now. And so I'll go to the Virgo because anyways, it steps us out of the archetype, I guess. And so when you go to Virgo, it's like these are service people. That's the thing that comes most natural to them, is to serve. And so, and also to deal with like the logical side of life, the logos. And so they're very logical. So they've got to come around and they've got to come into that dream world. And as soon as they come into that dream world, this is a Virgo we're talking about. So now they're just a complete person. For the Virgo to completely dissolve themselves and to complete their soul journey, it's like, yeah, I guess that would be it. It's like the human journey and then the soul journey, I guess you could say. And so to complete that soul journey, then they have to eventually come around to this is a Virgo. They've got to come around to that ego of the sun where they can fully express themselves and they can fully allow themselves to shine. Now they are a full and complete human being, and they've sort of integrated both sides of themselves fully. And that's what the full circle does. It's a full integration. And so anyways, it's kind of funny with Virgo, right? Because it's Leo back there, and the final integration comes with the expression. But that's the remedy. That's what we're trying to talk people through the circle. We're helping them to want to keep things moving. Again, this is, maybe I'm a Gieshta, right? And this is my big enemy, is that stuck energy. I'm like, no, you gotta keep it moving or it's gonna be disaster, guys. So I'm getting my lightning bolt and I'm breaking things open. And that is very strong Gieshta thing, to break things open like that. Again, he's the one that does crack things open. Whereas Uttara Bhadrapada is that stuckness, that staying, that movement. Now, anyways, it depends on people in their chart and blah, 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 whether or not they will crack open, if they'll move on from this and all of that stuff. But it's, to be an Uttara Bhadrapada person, it's a little bit tough because it is a blocking, stopping energy. They just get getting deeper and deeper and going deeper into the fantasy and losing touch with reality even more and more and more and more. And again, I think that's like, it's very hard for them to get out of that and start to move again, to accept reality. It's like, you need to get into that, up to the Aries part. It's like, you got to do something now. You got to move, right? And so then anyways, from there, you start to integrate the dream, right? It's like me, I want to do 3,000 kilometer pilgrimages. It's like, well, Mike, first you got to get up off your ass, right? You got to stop writing and go and do something. So anyways, so I'm just at the dream stage right now. Leave me alone, guys. So I've got all my big dreams. We did Mars.
When you're talking about Mars, like I know someone close that she's a kirtan singer.
Okay.
She sings kirtan, so it's like, it's that mantra and that dream of like, you continue the repetition deeper into the dream, and when you get a good flow in that kirtan, then it goes into kind of this kind of chaos of randomness of, oh, I feel like screaming now. Oh, I feel like going silent now. And it's just like going into that randomness. But the repetition of the mantra helps kind of keep you in reality and stay you grounded. So now I'm thinking, like, if ever next time I get someone to Uttara Bhadrapada, I'd ask them about mantras. I'd ask them what do they do to kind of keep them from always doing something. And I think that mantra is a way to help you kind of connect back to that upper light rather than staying in that middle ground between the two.
Well, I think what the mantra would do for an Uttara Bhadrapada, it gets them into the zone, right? That's the means of getting into the zone. But on another hand, it's sort of also, it exhausts a lot of that restless energy for them, right? And so once they sort of exhaust that restless energy, then they can come back to reality a little bit more, right? And they're not like jittering or bouncing their mantraing, and they can find some peace through those mantras. Samuel Beckett, God, he's another great author. He was a playwright and a poet and a lot of short stories, and I think he wrote a couple novels. His plays and his short stories are incredible. I really recommend looking up one or two of them. Waiting for Godot was his famous one. It's kind of a play on waiting for death. He had another one called I think it was called The Exile. God, that made such an impression on me. It was so powerful. But it was this guy, and he got let out. You're not sure if he got let out of prison or an insane asylum or what he really got let out of, but he got let out. But he's treating getting let out as like that's the big disaster that's befallen him now. He's being let out of this institution. He feels like he's being forced and kicked out, but it's like his sentence came to an end or something, right? Not really sure. And he goes off into society and he doesn't know anything. He starts to beg, but he hates himself, just full of self-loathing. And so he hates himself so much, he can't even show himself to people to do the begging. And so he slowly retreats completely. His identity retreats completely from the begging. So he doesn't even want him to see his hand, and he's got a cup on a stick, and he's fully hiding himself from people. He's trying to beg for food. And eventually he ends up basically, it sounds like he just goes to sleep in a boat that's, sitting by the water. I think he was living under the boat, like an upside down boat or something like that. It's all very cloudy, but he ends up going to sleep under that, basically just sleeping or starving to death or something. You're not really sure what happened to this guy, but what he did is he just retreated from the world until he just dissolved. And that's Samuel Beckett type stuff. It's really dark and really, really powerful like that. Beautiful imagination. But a lot of it is about death and that retreating from this world. Chuck Norris is interesting. He found an ancient spring on his land. Like that. I think there's a bit of a case too, could be said for Mercury and Uttara Bhadrapada. It's like, it's those, like that child Perseus in a sense. If you look into in India, if you spend any time in India, spend some time watching Indian television if you get a chance. It's great stuff. But you get these like the Bala Hanuman, right? This is baby Hanuman. Cartoons, like there's like 10 Bala Hanuman cartoons, and Bala Krishna, the little baby Krishna sort of stuff. And it is this sort of this immature dreamer, I guess you could say. Mercury, it's that child dreamer in a sense, like that. And so their stories, their narratives also become very dreamy, disconnected kind of stories, stuff that's kind of way out there. It's like, well, Lon Chanley, makeup and pantomime, right? The pantomime, the kind of stuff like that. Chuck Norris, in a sense, maybe that's the yoga forms and stuff that he does like that. Victor Hugo, Les Miserables, as well, kind of fits into this stuff. What else we got here? Oh, here we go. Empress Wu Zetian and Thomas Jefferson, Galileo. Well, some big people. Satoshi Nakamoto, I think that's the guy who started Bitcoin. That's counting the chains, counting the links, counting the connections, maybe with Mercury. Mercury also does the accounting for being stuck in the mud, for example. Accounting for the dreams. Galileo, for example, he got held to account for his account of the stars, his account for the movement of the planets, for example. Wilbur Wright as well, bringing up the Wright brothers, bringing up into the sky. Vajrayana is interesting. I wonder if Mercury doesn't bring a bit of stuttering. Now, Vajrayana doesn't stutter, but again, it's that sort of it's that connection to mantra, to chanting, to the repetition. And Vajrayana, oh wow, I've mentioned him before. I love his bhajans. If you like Indian spiritual music, you gotta listen to Vajrayana. Like that. Here are Shaquille O'Neal and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. They're both together bouncing their basketball, being big childhood heroes, right? To all the adolescents, maybe, right? As maybe what's going on here. Wim Hof is there as well. Yeah. What else we got here? Kyle M. There's Queen Elizabeth II, Albert Einstein. It's interesting, right? Mercury's debilitated in Pisces. Look at these names again and repeat that to yourself. This Mercury is debilitated for Thomas Jefferson and Galileo and Queen Victoria and Albert Einstein and Pope Clement and Thomas Starzl, who's a transplant surgeon, and Albert Speer, who completely revolutionized armaments and production, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who made it to the Supreme Court, and all of these people. It's like debilitations and exaltations aren't always what they're sort of made out to be. In a lot of cases, they really do seem to make more the exaltations make more problems than they seem to solve. And the debilitations, well, we seem to, I don't know if spiritually, maybe the debilitation's not very good. I don't see a lot of very spiritual people with this. Pope Clement, but we know what the popes are like. Joseph Campbell, maybe as well, mythology and stuff. And so I don't know. Maybe it's very good material life and not very good spiritually or something. With this Mercury, I don't know. Some of the people I know personally, Jitendra Kumar, this guy, he's not at all. I don't know how to explain Jitendra. He's not what we would call spiritual. He's a complete bastard, probably one of the biggest sinners I know amongst my clients. But he has his knowledge of spirituality, like he has huge knowledge, all the temples, so many of the like really tiny secret cults, and he's gone around and just met all the babas, and so he's this kind of like really dual personality that way when it comes to something like his spirituality. He's he's just actually had to run away from everything and go away from everything, and he didn't believe me. I predicted this for him for a long time ago. And I told him, you're going to have to go away. There's not going to be a choice. And he was like, no, that's impossible. He's total homebody kind of character. And now he's going away because he has no choice. And I gave him kind of what his best option was, like astrologically. I said, go and find some Baba. And he's like, he's not a spiritual guy, right? And he's like, I can't do that. And I'm like, dude, half the Babas are spiritual guys either. So go and find some bastard of a Baba and offer him your service. And that's how you're going to get through this period of, he's basically exiled, I guess you could say. Like I said, he's a bastard. I don't mind saying that out loud because Jitendra Kumars, there's about 1 million of them in India. So Good luck finding Jitendra. Um, um, that's actually, it's kind of, Jitendra, that's kind of funny. That's a couple of these people I know personally. These guys are, Adam's a bastard, Kyle's a bastard. They don't really have, there's nothing really spiritual about them except that they really like me, sort of idea, right? Um, and so like that comes up a lot. Yeah, a few of these other people down here as well. They're spiritual, but they're very heterodox, very, very heterodox type spiritualities with some of these people. Bush spirit, more closer to Rudra kind of spirituality stuff comes up with some of these people. Rick Levine was like what did he do? A mentalist, they called him, right? Which is very, anyways, very close to a lot of what we're doing, just out of this world kind of stuff, I guess. Tulsi Gabbard's interesting to see her here, right? She's like a big politician woman. If I've never heard Tulsi Gabbard speak, you should listen to her at least once. You're like, how is this woman a politician? It's impossible. She's out there, man. She's out in left field compared to most politicians. I love her and hope she rolls the USA someday. But she's a bit out there like that. Let's see if I've got anything interesting here with Mercury. Yeah, and the Ascendant, of course, they are never going to grow up games their whole lives, kind of living the fantasy, living the dream. Second place, going into herbalism, working with food, inventory, a lot of counting of food as well, can go on like that. The storytellers as well with Mercury in the second house. Really like Hugh Hefner, right? These fantasy stories, quite literally. Playboy used to do, I don't know if they do this. When I was a kid, I used to like this kind of Playboy, but the pictures never did it for me. It was the words, it was the stories, it was like Penthouse letters or Playboy letters or something. And so it was, it wasn't real letters. Somebody was just sitting making these letters up. They wrote these sex fantasy stuff. But that's like the Hugh Hefner side of the stories that can come out of this sort of thing. Nebivas Bakar. I keep trying to figure out how she even made it onto my list because I don't even know who this woman is. But I think they just had an AA rating on her birth time, probably, and I made her list. But I think she did do the Olympics, but she's kind of an Instagram kind of a fantasy girl, like a pinup girl, I guess you could say. And that's some of the energy here going on as well. That sort of stuff. The people I know personally, Genevieve, Cheryl, Ciara, all big into herbalism and food and foraging and all of that kind of stuff. Making tinctures as well, right? This kind of that liquidiness too of Uttara Bhadrapada. And probably a lot of too of like what do they call that medicine where there's nothing of the herb left in the tincture. It's just the minute, tiniest traces of that herb sort of left in the tincture. And so it's like if you have allergies, for example, say you're allergic to dandelion, they would have this tiniest, minutest trace. And by science, they say it's completely useless. There's nothing to it. But you take this tincture with the dandelion and it would sort of build up your tolerance and you could overcome the allergy, for example. What the heck? It's a whole branch of alternative medicine where they're doing those tinctures.
Is it homeopathy? No.
Say again?
Homeopathy? Is it homeopathy or something
Yes,
like that?
homeopathy. Yeah, that's the one. That's where they're
I think
making
so,
just
yeah.
no trace of it left at all. But that would be a very sort of Uttara Bhadrapada kind of second house, what they're dealing with. It's like they're dealing with dreams, but it's working. Like, what the hell is going on here? Right? It's like so much alternative medicine. It's like, what the hell is going on here? Quentin Tarantino, his shows, of course, are way out there. It's just third house messaging, right? William Shatner, of course, also way out there. I also mentioned Tulsi Gabbard being out there. Cheryl she's probably not even on any social media. She's a forest girl. She's she's way out there in the forest. That sort of way out there. These kind of things. I think Thomas Starzl, this transplant surgeon, again, there's a lot of sort of working with the hormones, working with the fluids of the body. Thomas Starzl, I think, was also like, this is like mixing the pig's heart and putting a pig's heart in a human, for example, right? The transplant surgeon, he was taking like someone else's leg and putting, I don't know what he did, but it was this sort of like making these fantasy creatures in a sense, right? Making the Frankenstein type sort of creatures, that sort of stuff. JMW Turner, he's a really great artist. I love his stuff, his works. A lot of his stuff was like, his last words on his deathbed was the sun is God. But a lot of it was this like the sun, but the sun also sort of reflecting off everything, right? It's like when you get the sun reflecting off the water, you get the shimmering all over. You get this like, a lot of his art was explosion of light, right? These mirror images, like you got the light in the sky and the light off the ocean. And so it was just this blinding light in his artwork. It was really, really quite incredible and beautiful. In a sense, like Quentin Tarantino's, I think he was the director of the Las Vegas one, Hunter S. Thompson. Anyway, it's very similar, but his shows is just this like, well, it's Mercury. It's that recording as well, I think, is happening in here. But his shows are just such a burst of unreal activity, right? It's like they've got these candies too when you're a kid. You know, you chew into it and there's this burst of flavor that comes out of the center of it. That's kind of this this Mercury Uttara Bhadrapada is what I get a sense of here. Here's the fourth house. Of course, Mercury is going to be quite good at teaching. I think Chuck Norris, Wim Hof doing their teaching. I don't know, Francis Ford Coppola. I don't know if this is teaching or exactly, or might see the mentorship, maybe the third house. Usually where you see that kind of thing. Let's see who we got up there. We got any mentorships going on? I don't know. The captain, right? He was always a big mentor in a sense. Queen Elizabeth II. I don't know if the second is kind of important here, right? Because that copy, it's that mirror imaging to a certain degree. Again, genetics, we usually see most of the genetics in Taurus, but there's a lot of genetics going on and a lot of lineage and a lot of ancestral stuff going on in Uttara Bhadrapada. Might not be the direct ancestors, like it's even like Queen Elizabeth II. It's like she didn't get that from her mother. She didn't get that name from the one who came just before her. Queen Elizabeth I was like generations, several generations before her. It's like we're picking up. It's like maybe these people don't have the traits of their mother and father. They've got their traits of their great grandmother, their great grandfather sort of idea. It's that sort of, they're here to complete karmas of their past ancestors, much more than they are to complete their own karmas. And so their lives are kind of dreamy, wandering. They're disconnected from reality. They're disconnected even from their own selves to a certain degree. So you get a lot of that. It's even like Wim Hof. We talked about this, like the Mars and Uttara Bhadrapada, they have no impulse control. Well, that's exactly what Wim Hof method teaches us. It's like, and I've never done it myself, but I can understand the theory of Wim Hof method is very, very powerful and probably also a really good remedy for people that have no impulse control, that have no control over their desires, that have no control over their responses. Because of the meditations and stuff, like it's like you go into that water and that cold water triggers that auto response in the body, in the immune system, in a sense. And so it triggers that. And so what Wim Hof teaches, and the meditation side of it teaches, is to control that so that you don't kind of lose your shit when you go in the water. You still maintain control of your breath and you maintain control of your heart rate. And so, and that's really what it is. It's like someone comes and tells you a disaster. It's like Dana's in the middle of the ocean, her partner comes up and says like, we're sinking and we don't have a life raft. And so Dana's a good yogi, right? And she does her meditations and practices her breathing, but she's probably going to have that moment where she loses her shit. And that's a little bit that Uttara Bhadrapada in a sense. And so then she'll go, okay, just breathe. We've got some life vests. We've got some wood. We can make a boat, right? She'll MacGyver it. I know I've got faith in Dana. She'll pull it out. But it's that losing your shit. And so someone like Wim Hof and the meditation teaches us not to lose our shit. So, and when I look at these people, it's like Chuck Norris. That's his master. He's fighting, and that's the mastery of a great fighter. We think, oh, you got to go in, you got to lose your shit and just kick everybody's ass. No, you've got to go in, you've got to be calm, you've got to use your training and kick everybody's ass. Because once you lose your shit, once you get mad, once your emotion starts to come into it, Mercury's not very emotional generally, right? And so once your emotions comes into it, all is lost in a sense, right? And so you got to just not lose your shit, guys. It's really like, we got to work really hard not to lose our shit. It's like,
or use that energy, use the energy of losing your shit to do stuff, because I am like that exactly. I do lose my shit or I get angry in life circumstances, but I use that energy. I really do. And that's where I get my best ideas. Like you said, like in the moment, it's like that losing myself that I find myself. So I work in that dichotomy a bit.
Yeah, and that's really it. It's like so much, like I do a lot of writing. A lot of my best writing is when I go for a walk and I just try to forget everything I've been studying, right? And I just enjoy the birds and the trees. And I just go out there and it's like suddenly I start to get these like downloads of information in a sense, right? It just opens to the universe in a sense. And so, yeah, losing your shit can work both ways. Someone like Galileo, for example, he had so many, like, they wanted to kill that man, right? And so you can imagine if he sort of lost his shit and started getting really emotional with all of this problems he was having in life, they probably would have killed him. But he kept it together and he just kept explaining things from a scientific perspective. And this was the movement of the planets. So a lot of people, Galileo, Kepler, Einstein has this. The movements of the planets was actually quite significant in Uttara Bhadrapada as well. So it's not just like space. It's like, I don't know if it's that final frontier kind of idea, or what exactly is going on up there, but there's certainly a lot going on with space anyways. But nothing's really static in Uttara Bhadrapada. Right? It's like the movement is always, it's repetitive, like the movement of the planets. You know what I did? I was looking at, oh, you don't mind going to left field with me. I think you guys like it. So I was looking at, yeah, it was this Pluto, was it Pluto and Neptune? Pluto and Uranus? Yeah, it was Neptune and Pluto. And I found this amazing. Every around 450 years or so, Neptune and Pluto come conjunct in Rohini, right? Wow, I found that amazing. Absolutely just mind-blowing. But I'm looking at all this and I've been thinking about it for a couple of days. There's got to be another crossover somewhere. So I'll look for that. There's got to be, because Neptune's moving fairly I don't know. Anyways, there might be another crossover. But anyways, it's that oftentimes what the astrologers are looking for, especially when we're looking at the transit and trying to predict the future, is we're looking at these things that come full circle. We're looking at those full cycles. And so we're breaking things into different cycles. And a lot of times it's not just the cycle of Pluto. It's not the cycle of one planet. It's the cycle of two planets. When do Pluto and Neptune come together? Right? That completes the cycle. When do Saturn and Jupiter make a conjunction? That completes a cycle. And sometimes it's not about one conjunction. Sometimes it takes 3 or 4 conjunctions for a full, like I think Saturn and Jupiter need 3 or 4 conjunctions before their cycle is complete. So they conjunct in different parts of the zodiac, and then the cycle is over. And so, anyways, just these cyclical movement. If everything is moving in Uttara Bhadrapada,
pattern recognition.
This also that pattern, because they're looking at things as in the patterns, in cycles, you could say, right? It's really that's the energy is neither destroyed nor created, right? And so now it's just dilute. It's just potential, going into potential energy, basically. And so there is a lot of storing of energy, which is a lot of yoga as well as energy storage. Amber Heard, Empress Wu Zetian, she was the first, again, going where no man has gone before, or woman. She was the first empress of China, and really the only significant empress of China as well. I imagine she kind of worked her way up from being a concubine and worked her way up into empress, which is like, her whole story is just incredible. I imagine she was a lot like Amber Heard, probably very manipulative, right? Very just turning things around, black and white. I've talked about some gaslighting sort of energies in some positions. I think Mercury and Uttara Bhadrapada would have some of that gaslighting type energy, black is white and white is black sort of idea. Oh, this was interesting as well. Where the heck did I see that? I can't remember. Who was it? Oprah's husband, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. There was a few characters had some position. I can't remember what position it was now, it's offhand. We talked about Bhadrapada, but it was this like black marries white or white marries black. Prince had some positions in Uttara Bhadrapada, and Prince was very fascinating because he even said himself, I don't know if I'm gay or straight, white or black, what I am. He really existed in this sort of gray zone between all of that. It's like Uttara Bhadrapada Pisces is almost a space between life and death, between death and life. It's a little gap there. Now, I'm going to come back to Prince. Prince was a fascinating, let's look at his chart. So in the end, this guy, he became a Jehovah's Witness, right? And so when I heard that, I thought, oh my God, you get this sort of like person who doesn't know anything and eventually coming around sort of a full circle and becoming a Jehovah's Witness. I thought, oh my God, he must have made the full circle, right? I don't think we don't all make the full circle in our lifetime, right? People get stuck along the way. And that's like, well, that's what our astrologers were like, keep going, right? We want to try to move people, keep them moving. And so not everybody makes it a full cycle, but if we're really, really lucky, we do make a full cycle in life, and we complete all of our tasks, you could say. Now, I don't know. I don't think this is dependent on the 120-year life cycle. Like really, if we make the 120 years and we've experienced absolutely everything life has to experience, that's not necessarily, you could say, not necessary to complete the cycle to experience everything life has experienced. You can complete the cycle sitting in a cave. I think a lot of rituals have to do with this. A lot of rituals as well have to be internalized. Like rituals is like, well, if you see these Brahmins doing rituals, it's just some fantasy. They're like playing with dolls, right? Dress Krishna up and wash his clothes and right and give him all his food and it's this really sort of fantasy sort of thing. But what that is doing is that's turning the wheel, right? It's keeping the cycles moving. Sometimes if you're stuck, you can't move and change things in the outside world. You can get things moving through ritual. And that helps you keeps the ball rolling. Yeah. And the ball, the rolling ball, that's another good metaphor for a lot of Uttara Bhadrapada stuff, is that rolling ball. And you see it like a basketball and soccer balls, and you see a lot of people playing with their balls in here. AC/DC, God, I was just a teenager. I love this, right? These play on words. I always love play on words. And AC/DC did this song like, I love big balls. You love big balls. We all love big balls, right? And the whole thing was just like singing about like parties, I guess. But AC/DC was, they're a very childish band. And so they were playing with words, right? And making little adolescent kids like me snicker and try to shock my grandmother by playing it for grandma, who loved it, by the way. So, but that's all the balls. And when we think the balls, it's like the costume ball, right? It's like they've got the thing on their eyes and they've got all of that. And so those kind of balls are Uttara Bhadrapada as well. So, and in a sense, it's like it takes really big balls to get out of yourself, right? It takes really big balls to just leave that identity behind. What we're doing, this is the terrifying prospect of spirituality is like, well, you give up everything you have and you get the universe. That takes balls, man. Really, you got to have big balls to do that. So anyways, that's that energy of Uttara Bhadrapada is I think having balls in that sort of metaphorical sense as well. So and it relates with all those kinds of plays on words as well, are very much related. Dana's going to love this. Me and you we got to get together on this actually. And write a book specifically on language through the nakshatras. Because again, we're seeing a lot of play on words going on. A lot of what language is, it's actually a mix of language, prefixes and suffixes and all these kind of adverbs and adjectives being put together. A lot of that is Uttara Bhadrapada. These sort of description words. I think it really, especially adverbs describing the action sort of ideas, really becomes, but it's very descriptive here. And anyways, something to think about, Dana, because there's a lot, anyways.
I love it already, because even the words, if you start like in Sanskrit or any language with prefix and suffix, you could even understand it like the padas.
Yeah.
So you have them ruled by like which language and which suffix, and I love it. I love this idea.
Yeah, this is all there. And there's so much there. And I'm sure a whole book could be read, because I'm sure every nakshatra represents a different type of word, a different type of grammatical structure. And I've touched on some of that through this whole thing. I love language, of course. It was one of my favorite sort of studies in school was languages. And I don't think it's just like we're Vedic astrologers, and so Sanskrit is really important, but really it's any language you can study. And to be an astrologer, that's probably the most significant side study you can do. It's just study like the history of words, the etymology, the energy of syllables, right? And the conjunction of syllables. And then you start like, well, you put the syllables together to make words, that's a whole science. Put the words together in grammatical fashions, that's a whole science. And it's all, there's a beauty of that within all of the nakshatras. And again, I've touched on it in so many areas, and I think Dana, I think me and you should, and maybe not tomorrow, we don't have to talk, but soon. It's something we should think about. Yeah. So Venus, Uttara Bhadrapada, we get that exaltation. Hans Christian Andersen and his amazing and incredible stories, fairy tales, right? And that's that Venus, that beauty of the imagination, and Venus really getting to fully express herself through imagination, and through that fantasy. And so it's quite nice. Van Gogh, of course, that's what really ups his art and brings that dreaminess to his hands and what he's writing. Queen Bloody Mary's interesting sort of character. Because we call her Bloody Mary and we say, oh, she was an awfully murderous tyrant of a queen. Well, King Henry VIII, who was just before her, was probably more murderous. And Queen Elizabeth I, who we all love, she also killed a whole ton of people. But they don't have these stories of like being burned at the stake, I guess, like they do with Bloody Mary. It was a little bit more ruthless. But again, it's sort of that myth. She was no worse than anybody else, really. But then we get Valerie Solanas, who was a militant feminist. This is the girl who shot Andy Warhol, right? Andy Warhol, he must have some connection to Uttara Bhadrapada as well. That kind of very modernistic, very avant-garde kind of art sort of stuff. A couple dancers have this. Some yogis. Kind of, there's our George Washington, Ramakrishna. Beauty, harmony, balance of being where no one has been before. Maybe that was George Washington. The American Revolution was like the first revolution, right? After that, it was the domino effect, chain reactions. Those type things, I think, are all sort of Uttara Bhadrapada type stuff. Here we go, Copernicus. There's another guy dealing with those stars. That sort of thing. Okay, David Eggers is an interesting character to have here. Again, that idea of going nowhere one went before. I don't know if I described this in some of his other works, but he really tried to do something different with publishing. And now, if you've looked at books, they're all the same. The setup of a book and the general framework of a book is all the same. Every book is the same, right? Just the body of the book is different. David Eggers really tried to do something different with publishing and really went where people and tried some stuff that nobody had ever tried before. And he had some fun, but there's a reason books are set up the way they are, because that's just really the best way to set up books. Now there's some, if you want to get really technical, there are some slight style changes. I don't know if you guys have ever studied language. APA model of writing book, which is like social sciences have a certain way of organize things. The humanities have their own way of organizing things. And there's a Chicago Book of Style, which is, I think, is what most newspaper uses and most people uses. But there's these kind of three sort of different books, main books of style for writing. APA, I think, is maybe APA is what the journalists use. Anyways, this is just how things are done. These are the rules. And so once someone like David Eggers steps out of that, everything goes crazy. But yeah, anyways, what else can we see here? Got some hockey players. We've got some, again, these martial artists. It's that sense of repetition, repeating the forms, repeating of the flowing, bouncing the ball, that a lot of repetition. The dancers and the choreography, Shakira doing the dancers. In a way, Copernicus was understanding the choreography of the planets, in a sense, that mathematics to do that sort of stuff. Ramondo's kind of interesting. I should delete his last name. He's kind of interesting. He builds dream homes, right? He builds like $20 million homes for millionaires, right? Dream homes he's talked about as well. A lot of these places he builds now, they all the rich people, they all have an escape room in their house now, right? That escape room is very, very Uttara Bhadrapada as well. Who else can we see here? There's Abraham Lincoln and George Washington. Both have Maximilian Robespierre. He was beheaded, I think, as well. Robespierre, didn't he meet the guillotine, part of the French Revolution? I'm pretty sure he did. There was another King Louis that has some positions here. I'm not sure. I can't remember seeing the one who was officially beheaded, but the son of Louis and Marie Antoinette, he had some positions in Uttara Bhadrapada as well. And so his whole life, I think from the time he was 3 until 10 or something like that, he was just in jail. He was probably tortured and he was raped in there. And, oh God, he had the worst, like he was a prince. And then actually his father was killed before he was. So technically he would have been a king as well. But they killed him by the age of 10 or 12. And I think as the story goes, it was actually he was killed by friends essentially that just wanted to end his suffering and his misery in the dungeon. Can you imagine that being like a 10-year-old boy of the king in the prison? Oh God, that would have just like, you were just God, the worst. And then like such a pretty little boy, right? God, it would have been horrible. And he's just murderous kind of God. It would have been, oh. Anyways, so you can imagine. Uttara Bhadrapada, use your imagination. So we get the Titanic was sinking during this. Now, I think what's sort of important to remember about the Titanic, it hit an iceberg. Now, Parashara tells us that only 1/4 of Vishnu sticks above the surface. 3/4 of Vishnu is hidden beneath the surface. So it's like Vishnu is our whole reality. And so 3/4, this Uttara Bhadrapada is like 3/4 of reality is in Uttara Bhadrapada hiding beneath the surface on us, sort of idea. So what we really see of reality is just 1/4 of it. And the rest is lying below here. And it can get you, right? That's what happened to the Titanic. It probably, I don't know exactly how this works, but on the surface of things, it probably looked like the iceberg was way over there, actually. It wasn't even close. And all of a sudden, shit, right? And now we got a problem. Dana, she's so going to check all her life-preserving stuff after she gets off this call. I know you're going to. So this was someone like we see quantum physicists here as well. Again, that's a whole other world going off. Stevie Wonder, blind guy. There was a couple blind guys here as well. And I think that has a little bit to do with it too. It's like being blind is a little bit like staring into space. I don't know if I can compare those sort of things. But it's a little bit like this fans. They've always got to sort of imagine what the world around them even looks like. So there's that kind of stuff. Well, we're quickly coming to the end here, so we'll just do Jupiter quickly. Jupiter here is very, very nice. Johann von Goethe, this ability to just write and expand this imaginary realm, I guess. So it's an expansion, but it's also that belief. It's a little bit that, what could you say, blind faith is really strong with Uttara Bhadrapada. The Uttara Bhadrapada Pisces is that internal expression of spirituality. So when you get Jupiter here, it's going to be that strong, well, it's going to expand that internal expressions of spirituality. So the external expressions, they might not seem as much like a guru and things on the outside, but inside they're very devout. It's like Dale Earnhardt. He was a race car driver, but he was a very devout Christian, right? And he talked a lot about Christianity to, like, in the pits and around the racetrack and right, that kind of stuff like that. We get Sigmund Freud here as well, the psychoanalysis, just that knowledge, that wisdom sort of the dream world, of those altered states in a sense. Patabi Jos has this, Nietzsche has this, such a powerful, strong place for Jupiter and Uttara Bhadrapada. Again, they're still going where no man has gone before, but with ideas, sort of thing. They're taking ideas where nobody. Thomas Spence, he was also, oh yeah, he was the other one, like Oprah's he was a white guy, he was a Spanish guy, I think he was like redhead actually. Sort of not Spanish guy, Irish sort of fellow, very, very white. He was like as white as it comes, but he worked a lot with the Aboriginals. He married a Métis woman. He got involved in a lot of fire rituals, is a little bit, well, I'd say Bhadrapada, not Uttara, but both fire rituals and stuff like this also come. God, we've been talking so much about water, but now fire, Jesus. We're just getting there now. But there's the fire magic is here as well. A lot of the fire rituals, and Thomas Spence in the early days in Canada, I'm sure he was the big redheaded, right? The kind of fire, probably a fire crotch, I guess is what we call redheads in Canada. But he had the big fire head. Louis Riel, he was Louis Riel's right-hand man. Those guys were going out, and Louis Riel especially, but Thomas Spence was helping. They were going out into the frontiers, out into the Aboriginals and the Métis, and spreading the word of God, right? Spreading that ideology beyond the borders. Proselytism without borders, I guess you could say, right? Those missionaries who really went out there. I wouldn't be surprised. I don't have any of their charts. I should look some of them up. They've only been coming into my life recently. The Spanish conquistadors. I'll bet you a lot of them would have our Uttara Bhadrapada placements as well. I don't know if you'd find their birth times and stuff like this, but there's probably a lot of interesting stuff to be found there. Lee Harvey Oswald, Reineck, the SS secret police guy, Clifford Olson. We're seeing in the second pada, we're coming a lot of like murderous kind of people here. I don't know if Dale Earnhardt, if he died in a car accident or his son did. Anyways, car racing, there's a lot of that sort of accidental death. It's interesting, cars are coming up here as well, because at least one person with Uttara Bhadrapada, I'm not sure where they were, one of these SS guys, his car blew up. It was a car bomb underneath. Again, it's like what you don't know about can bite you, right? We've got to try to be aware of everything. Fidel Castro, there's B.F. Skinner, behaviorism. He was one of those writing utopian type books. Satoshi Nakamoto, Bitcoin inventor. That was also that blockchain, but also the, that's not a real person either. I don't even know what he's doing here. It's like they made someone up and gave him credit for inventing Bitcoin, basically. Not even sure if that person exists, but here he is. With Jupiter and Uttara Bhadrapada, it sounds like he could be real. Terry McKinnell, he was a Vedic astrologer as well. Jet Li, there's some of that movement and that. A lot of mythology coming here. Jacques Fresco was some kind of alternative economics, I think green economics, or maybe anarcho-economics. I can't remember exactly, but he was sort of changing that sort of stuff. I don't know why, as soon as I see Brad Pitt's name under the Jupiter Uttara Bhadrapada, I get this vision of the show he did, the fly fishing one of his early shows. It was strong about brotherhood. I think that's some of that connections as well. The friar, the Jupiter, the brother, the monk kind of idea, the friar sort of monk, but there's still some connection like that. And fishing, of course, there is coming up, and going way off in the forest like you do when you go fishing. All of that stuff. And Coultier, she's a I think this, if I've got this correct, she's a political commentator on the right wing, but she's sort of like, well, the left definitely doesn't like her, and I think she's got problems on the right as well. She's kind of isolated. by her ideals, and her ideology has kind of isolated her to a certain degree. So all of those kind of energies you get with Uttara Bhadrapada. Yeah, wonderful people with that. Again, it's like Patabi Joyce and Lee Harvey Oswald, right? Serial killers and saints are both in here. Someone like Louis Riel, he's very, all the Canadians know Louis Riel. Some of them know Thomas Spence, but Louis Riel is a very controversial figure here. A lot of controversy over his hanging. They hung him. Again, that sort of hangman, or that losing of the head, I guess, comes into here. It's like, too, when people go crazy, when they go out of their mind and they lose their head, that's, I think, some of that Uttara Bhadrapada placement as well, right? So it can be pagal crazy or spiritual crazy. I must have mentioned this. I love this word pagal. The day Sanjay explained to me, he's like, pagal means crazy in Hindi. We use it to mean crazy. And Sanjay was like, well, actually, if you look into the root of the word pagal, it's pan and gal, I don't know exactly, something like that. But the root means like, leave them alone. They're good. It's like, these are usually people who they're enlightened in their own world, right? They're good. Leave them alone. They're not hurting anybody, right? They're good. It's not an enlightenment the rest of us can follow, but they're good. Just leave them alone. Go ahead, Dana.
It's interesting because the root word of the Spanish word crazy, which is loco, comes from Latin, which means locus, and it's place, like out of place, like leave me in place I belong kind of idea, like leave me alone where I belong. Like if I am crazy, it's I'm out of my place, you know? So it also comes from the same idea of leave me alone in isolation.
I love language. Language is the coolest thing in the whole world. There's a lot of language stuff seems to come up in the Bhadrapadas. Purva and Uttara, lots of language stuff comes up because language is interesting. It's like there's only so many syllables, and the rules of grammar depends what language, but they're fairly set in stone. You've got to follow those rules, but they allow for an infinite amount of expression. And the other, well, that gets strange as well, because it's like allows for an infinite amount of expression, but it never allows us to express the infinite, right? And so it's that duality. It allows us to get closer to the infinite, but it'll never allow us to express it. So, and that's really the beauty of language. Like when you start to study like the syllables and the parsing and the deep structures of language, I swear to you, it brings you closer to God. There's something so divine in language, that whole subject and object thing. Noam Chomsky sort of tells us that language, or the grammar to language, the structure and framework of language, is actually innate. It's inborn. We all have. It's like God itself, right? It's really incredible. And then you've got all these words that we pick up from nature, right? And so then we apply everything we learn to those, what we have naturally inside of us. And then we get this amazing thing we call language. That language is interesting. We talked about this in other places, that first word, wow, I'm empty, fill me up, I need something. And really, language is that sort of like, what we're missing is like a connection to others. And so that's really what language allows us to do, is to connect to others. That's why we have to communicate. That's why communication between couples is so important. That's how you connect. That's how you see each other. That's how you get inside of each other. And so it's so important. And then, well, in a sense, the better understanding you have of all these little different parts of language, the better understanding you're going to be able to have of yourself. And the better, more you're going to be able to connect with other people. And then you start throwing into like studying of other languages into that. And it completely opens up a whole field, but it's unnecessary because like me and Dana just talked about, if you study any language and get down to the roots, God, they're the same thing. Crazy used to be like, just leave that person alone. Now crazy means just the opposite. Take them and throw them into an asylum. You have to do something to help that person. And no, they're crazy. Just leave them alone. That's it. Just leave them the fuck alone. You don't have to pump them full of drugs. You don't have to put them in a padded room, right? You don't have to restrain them. You don't have to, like I said, you don't have to send them to military school and teach them discipline. Just leave them the fuck alone. Sorry. Uttara Bhadrapada. It's getting to me, guys. I'm losing my mind here with all of it. Emmett, you're flashing.
Yeah, I'm gonna need to go soon. I was wondering first if we could talk about because the live class might be too much, but trying to access your document, the Nakshatra project document. I was wondering if you had figured that out yet, or what your vibe was there.
No, but do you know anything about this kind of thing?
Yes, but
Okay.
not using Mac software though.
Well, we'll see what happens here. Why don't we,
Okay.
When you got some time, send me a message and we'll talk.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. All right.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll figure that out. We're out of time. We're on Saturn, Uttara Bhadrapada. We see Joseph Stalin, bunch of industrials, Ratan Tata, biggest steel man. A lot to do with steel actually here as well. A lot of steel sort of workers and industrialists. Claude Guerrero, geochemistry, more chemistry, oxycodone. Yeah, Speer made the oxycodone, right? Excellent dream drugs going on there. Anthony Hopkins, Warren Beatty, they were also kind of got into this fantasy type stuff, fantasy characters sort of thing. Like back in the day, people used to dress up at Halloween as a Warren Beatty, the old like 1950s detective kind of idea. More drugs here with Kurt Cobain and dying. Frida Kahlo, she was a novelist, I think a little bit out there too in her works. Got a Tattoo Bubba. Tattoo Bubba's great. He's like, I only met him. He was going to take one of my big long astrology classes a bunch of years ago, and he never did. I really liked him, and I thought it was too bad. But he was like, he's hardcore. He's like skater and full of tattoos and hardcore kind of punk guy, and he just had the feeling my courses would be too spiritual for him. Sort of idea, I think, is why he didn't take it. And I thought it was way too bad because I think I miss him. I only met him. We just talked, and I miss the guy. And I just called him Tattoo Bubba, right? Nicknamed him that. So yeah, Pinkerton and Saddam Hussein and George Carlin. This is some of those like, they're kind of digging through these harsh truths from imagination somehow, or these harshness sort of going on behind the scenes or something like that. Saturn and Uttara Bhadrapada, it's like, it's going to close the door and just stay alone by themselves. Stuck in their own fantasy world, maybe something like that. We could say with Saturn when it's here. Interesting to see Ian Pavlov here because we saw another behaviorist here. So we obviously have some behaviorism going on here. Behavior modification techniques maybe is what's going on. And a lot of behavior modification does work through the subconscious mind somehow. It's like muscle memory, repetition helps to get you out of that. It's like the samskaras is that cycle, that repetition of repeating thoughts. And sometimes the only way to get out of that is to pick up a mantra, to pick up another repeating thought or an idea and cycle that through. And it's a lot of what mantras do is they sort of cleanse they clean our mind up. right? And so we sort of trade off the unhealthy repeating thoughts for, God help us, healthy repeating thoughts. Um, like that. And then hopefully somewhere along the line we can get an images that is free of thoughts. But a lot of times, and so there's a lot of obsessive energy with Saturn here as well. Very, very obsessive sort of energy kind of going on, like the nurse who killed her patients, Christine Gilbert, that kind of thing. Callum was interesting. He was a young guy. Just I met him on a bus going through, I don't know, Mexico or Guatemala or I don't know, wherever the heck I was a little while ago. And he was like this, he's one of these guys that does like electronic music type stuff, which usually involves a lot of repetition. But he is at the time, he was like, these young people are so sweet. I was the same. I was horrible. I was probably worse than he was, but he was so torn between this girlfriend who was just sort of breaking up with him, but they were never really together anyways. And so I don't know if she's still breaking up, and he shouldn't bother with it because anyway, she's going her own way, blah, blah, blah. And this other girl that I think she likes me and there's a future. And so he was so stuck between the past and the future and just so, this poor tortured lover. And so he ran away to Mexico to do a bunch of drugs and party and forget everything. Like that. There's another energy, Dustin Hoffman, the Rain Man, that again, that obsessive energy. I don't want to say necessarily of autism. There could be some autistic tendencies here. But again, it's that obsessive sort of repetitive kind of they just can't help themselves, and especially strong when Saturn's here. Harvey Cushing, that Cushing's disease as well. So they're stuck. They're in that kind of darkness. There's a bit of a depression there to a certain degree, I think, as well with this Saturn. Yeah, let's call that a thing, a day. Shall we? Yes, let's do it.
Thank you so much, Mike. I loved it.
Yeah,
Mahadev,
thanks.
have a nice
I'm so happy when you come and join us for classes. Little comments. I really like that. Just opens up whole worlds of reality.
It would be amazing to be doing this the whole day. Just listening, talking, getting ideas, and we get lost in these worlds. I love it so much.
Yeah, it's been a really great course. Gosh, we're coming to the last one. And I thought I
It's
had
never the last, never the last. I know it.
no. I thought I had plans for the next thing to just like jump into it and jump in running. But I started it and it's as you would expect, it's way more work than I thought it would be. And so so it's not going to be just coming out overnight. But I'm stewing. I've got all the ideas. I'm sitting in that Uttara Bhadrapada. Everything's just sort of like what's going to rise to the surface now is all we're waiting to see.
Yeah.
So we'll figure out.
I'll be here when it rises.
Sounds good. I thank you for your dedication to my work. It really means a lot to me, Dana. So
To me, it means a lot to have found each other, like in that 2020 year of change of everything.
yeah, for sure. So, thank
So
you.
have a nice week.
You
And
too.
thank you so much, Mike.
Enjoy your port life. Mahadev.
Thanks. Mahadev. Bye.